And a very good evening, ladies and gentlemen. From Australia and Phillip Island, we head up into the Northern Hemisphere, all the way around to the other side of the globe to Germany. We are at the Hockenheim Ring for round number 2 of the Supercars Pro Invitational Qualifier Series, presented, of course, by Logitech G. I'm Lockie Mansell, filling in this week for Jake Blackhall, and I'm going to be joined in commentary this evening by 2 experts. One voice will be very familiar to viewers of the Logitech Supercar Pro Invitational Series. It's a very good evening to Steve Sandman Clark. How are you going, Sandman?
Mate, I'm well, Lockie. How are you? Excited. I think it's a great little format to have the V8s at the Hockenheim Ring. What a great little racetrack, and I think this is really going to turn on some good action for us.
I'm sure it will. Also joining us in commentary this evening, the man who you'll recognise as one of the front runners of the Logitech G Supercars Pro Invitational. He doesn't have to race tonight because he finished in the top 20 in the championship standings last year, which means that he gets an automatic entry into this year's series. Good evening, Brenton Hobson. Hobbo, welcome aboard.
What's up, guys? Hello, and hello to everyone watching at home. It's good to be here. I'm looking forward to tonight. I think that Hockenheim will be a great platform for what will hopefully be some really good racing tonight.
It's a bit of a contrast to Phillip Island, isn't it? Because we've gone from somewhere that's a very fast-flowing circuit, long corners that put big loads through the tyres, and only a couple of slow corners, whereas at Hockenheim Ring, yes, there are a few high-speed corners, but there's also some quite slow turns and some big braking zones as well.
Oh, absolutely, a very big contrast between the two tracks. I mean, Hockenheim is a really good one. It's got a real variety of stuff actually, like fast, slow, like you say, tight, and a lot of sweeping corners as well. Pretty challenging for the drivers, challenging to set up for. And I mean, the good thing about it is that there's plenty of passing opportunities and lots of places for the guys to get side by side and race each other.
So we're just about completed the practice session. Then we'll get into a pair of 15-minute qualifying sessions. Pretty much the race format is exactly the same as it was at Phillip Island last week. So the bottom half of the field will head out for the first 15-minute session, and then the top half of the field for the second of our 2 15-minute sessions. And that will set the grid for what will be a 44-lap race this evening with a pair of compulsory pit stops. For those of you who missed the opening round at Phillip Island, that was James Scott, a very accomplished supercar driver in the virtual world, who took victory. Had to work hard for it though, and in the end finished just half a second clear of Robert Gibbs in the Evolution Racing Team Mustang. Those 2 drivers had a fantastic battle in the closing stint of the race. We've got Andrew Dyson, the DPR Simrigs driver, in 3rd position on the points table after round 1 at Phillip Island. But Sandman, it's really just about making sure that you finish consistently in the 4 rounds that make up this qualifying series to make sure that you're inside the top 20, because it'll be the top 20 drivers in the points who then progress through to the real deal, the main game, the Pro Invitational Series.
Absolutely. It puts a little bit of pressure on these guys too, doesn't it? When you're only talking about 4 rounds, like, you can't afford to have an absolute shocker. If you had a garbage round at round number 1 at Phillip Island, you really need to bring your A game for round 2, because you don't have much of the time to turn that championship around. So we saw some drivers that were up the front and got into a little bit of carnage, and they had sort of a difficult Phillip Island, and there's some people that probably didn't run as well as they would have liked too. So now it's all the emphasis on them is about absolutely trying to make the most of tonight, get up the front and get as many points as you can, because 4 rounds isn't long.
Exactly right. And speaking of a couple of those drivers who had shockers at Phillip Island, 2 names that spring to mind: Kurt Stenberg and Brian Borg. They're both very fast. We know that they're capable of finishing well inside the top 5 in this series, but both of them got caught up in incidents. We saw in particular Kurt Stenberg getting turfed off the road on the exit of turn 4 at Phillip Island, and he is a lowly 32nd in the points, with Brian Borg 1 spot behind in 33rd position. So the pressure's on both those drivers. They need to get big bundles of points out of the remaining 3 rounds on the calendar to make sure that they finish inside that top 20.
Yeah, and how heartbreaking was it for Stenny? And I don't know if he's forgiven me yet. The old commentator's curse. We were talking him up, and like you said, he was a top 5 driver, and he was having a good run. And the scary part is about that incident is that it happened so late in the race, and he was unable to bounce back. So, you know, you never want to get any incidents in a race, but you do, if you are going to get in one, you prefer it at the start of the night so you can have a chance of bouncing back. So, unfortunately, it got him at the end of the night, but no doubt he'll probably have a bit of pace in tonight. You know, I'm sure him and the TTR team have all been working hard and got themselves a good package, and hopefully he can bounce back from that one from last week.
Although you've obviously done a lot of laps on all of the circuits on iRacing in Supercars. What's the key to going quickly around the Hockenheim ring?
It's pretty challenging, like I said before. It's not a simple track. It's got a real variety to it. So there's some people are probably set up to go better in some parts of the track, whereas others will be set up to go a little better in others. But I think the key fundamentals to driving the supercar are going to be pretty important around here. I mean, you got to look after your tyres. There's a lot of really, really challenging acceleration zones around here, which are not straight. So trying to get the power down and get good exits out of the corners is really tough here. But there's also, you know, a couple of really tricky corners as well. You got to be careful about turn 1 in particular. It's a really hard corner to get right, and a couple of hairpins too. So, I mean, they're probably the main areas on the track you want to look for to get right, to make sure that you can put down a good lap time.
So I've got the first segment of qualifying underway at the moment for the slower 50% of the field. What we saw at Phillip Island is that you really only get one bite at the cherry because the tyres are only at their optimum performance for one flying lap, and then they fall away a bit. So I think what we'll probably see is the drivers going for 2, maybe 3 runs if they're lucky. That the no escape rule is in effect. So you can't finish your lap, hit the escape button and quickly head back to the pits that way. You have to do a slow down lap after you finished your flying lap. So when you plan out how you approach this session, you do have to take into consideration your out lap, your flying lap, and then your cool down lap back to the pits.
It's amazing, isn't it? The V8 Supercars tyres are your best friend in this category. So regardless, even at tracks that we see where there is a sort of, you know, a low grip as far as they're not too wearing on the tyres, that people will still opt for fresher tyres because it does make you feel a little bit like Superman, doesn't it? Although you'd be one to comment too, but we're going from 2 different grades of racetrack as far as it was pretty high wearing at Phillip Island, but we're probably not going to have that degradation that we saw there like we would here at Hockenheim.
Yeah, probably not quite the same. They're very different, like you say. The long sweeping corners at Phillip Island will just tear your tyres up. But approaching a qualifying session like this, it's really hard. Like Lockie sort of touched on it. You've got an outlap, and you have to go really slow, because if you do lean on the tyres on the outlap, you're giving up some of your performance on your flyer. So you see the slow outlaps, you have to do that to be able to get the maximum out of it on your flying lap. And then of course your in lap as well. So you're going to be pressing on your in lap. So the real trick to this, and it's high pressure, you don't have a lot of time. You do have to complete an in-lap and an out-lap before you can put in another flyer. And you've got to watch out for traffic too, because you're going to be going slow on your second out-lap, and you've got to watch out for guys that are off sequence. So it's a really stressful sort of situation in this qualifying session.
Touching on that, with the lengths of these straights, is these guys still trying to chase that? Well, I guess everyone's trying to chase that aero advantage and get some sort of draft. But we saw the draft, how much of an effect that played at Phillip Island. Is that key here too?
I mean, it's probably less important here than it is at Phillip Island, but you've got that long straight through the Parabolica there, so you've really got to try and maximise it if you can. But obviously the compromise is that you get some aero wash through some of the rest of the track. Yeah. So it's a real, you know, pros versus cons sort of thing. But ultimately, I think that the guys will probably prefer to have a draft if they can get one. But this is the sort of track where you could just go for clean air and send it, and hope that you can put down a good time without it.
Yeah, it's a bit of a balancing act, isn't it? Like you say there, there's obviously the advantage to be gained if you can slipstream somebody else, but there's also the time that you can lose in the dirty air or the aero washes. We've got a bit of an incident here on the approach to the hairpin with Delaney currently scored in position 6 on the timesheets. That is Blake Delaney, who's pulled off to the right-hand side of the circuit, and that ZB Commodore does not look like it's going anywhere in a hurry.
That's tricky, isn't it? Because there's obviously, like we spoke about, there's a no escape rule that's in effect now once we go green in this session. So I wonder if he's had engine damage, or like the car looks fairly straight. Doesn't look like he's had any drama as far as contact. Or sometimes you'll see guys park not that far off the racetrack, but they will get out of harm's way if they feel like they're not on, if they're on an outlap and they've got some faster cars. But strange that he was parked on the grass there, so I will have to investigate that.
So Chris Ireland currently fastest in this session, ahead of Sebastian Flock. Aaron Borg, a familiar name in real-life motorsport, a title winner in both the Toyota 86 Series and the Super Utes. He's third at the moment. Josh Muggleton, who had an absolute shocker at Phillip Island, didn't qualify particularly well, then got a drive-through penalty for jumping the start, and then just when it looked like his evening couldn't possibly get any worse, he had an internet connection issue which resulted in him disconnecting from the server and ultimately finishing 8 laps down. So Josh Muggleton, another driver who really needs to bag a big bundle of points tonight.
It's heartbreaking, isn't it, when you hear about that? But I guess, you know, we talk about in real world motorsport, that 20-cent part that destroys your weekend. I guess the internet falling out for our series, that's our 20-cent part. So it's one of those situations where it's totally out of your hands, but really puts him behind the 8 ball when, like we said, especially with the 4-round series.
There is Josh Muggleton at the moment. Just looks like maybe warming up to go for another hot lap and just dodging a bit of traffic as well. Good courtesy being shown to some other drivers that were perhaps on hot laps. And I think, Homo, that's one of the things, isn't it? Often in a qualifying session like this, particularly when it's only 15 minutes, you're going to have drivers who are on different strategies. So there might be some drivers who are on flying laps while other drivers are on a warm-up or a cool-down lap, and it's really important just to be aware of where you are on the racetrack to make sure you're not unnecessarily impeding other drivers.
No, you're absolutely right. I talked about it before. I mean, it's really stressful when you're in the car, particularly if you're the one doing the slow lap. You got to keep an eye on your relative, and you kind of really need a spotter at times to be able to let you know what's coming up behind. But it just gets really messy. The first lap's usually pretty good, but as you get towards the end of the session, like you mentioned, there's often people on different sequences. So it's pretty common to see, you know, people on a flying lap and there's other people going slow. I mean, if you go and press out on your second lap and you're not on a good lap, you're going to come into the pits immediately and roll back out for another go. So all of a sudden you're off sequence to those guys that are completing their runs. So it doesn't take much, but it's very distracting when you're on a fast lap and someone's going slow in front of you. But it's extremely stressful when you're trying to get around on a slow lap without getting in someone's way.
Chris Ireland, a minute 38.1, currently fastest. He's got a 0.2 of a second advantage over Sebastian Flock. Kurt Stenberg moves up to second position, just as I say that though, on a 1 minute 38.32, so goes within 0.16. Then it's Flock, Borg, Muggleton, back to Hayden Veld, Brian Borg, Blake Delaney, Brett Loxton and Harrison Dengate completing the top 10 at this stage. We've got 0.74 of a second separating the top 10 drivers in this lower 50% qualifying session.
It's so interesting, and I'm curious again. We saw it last week. We saw Muggleton top the timesheets in qualifying for the first lot that went out at Phillip Island, and then it wasn't too long into that session where he was bumped straight out of the top 10 almost instantly. So the way the track evolves and the way that different drivers are on the track, it's going to be interesting to see how these times hold up of Ireland. Like I said, that 38.1. And then, of course, how much that track evolves. I think these guys will be itching to get out there. Is that something that worried you, Brenton, when you were in split qualifying sessions, when you found yourself possibly either at the advantage or maybe a slight disadvantage of how much the track changes?
Well, it's always in the back of your mind. I mean, you want to get the best conditions possible, but ultimately you also want to just put your best foot forward when you're on the track. I think there's a few people out here at the minute that I think will be probably a little unhappy with their time so far. So... you know, I think irrespective of what the track conditions are, that was a big moment of turn one. Irrespective of what the track conditions are at the time, you need to just go out and do the absolute best that you can at the time. And we know at the moment Germany is not particularly hot, so the track conditions are quite cool, and it looks like they haven't really changed yet, even from practice through into qualifying. So track temperature doesn't look like it's going to play a big role, but like you talked about, the track progression is a different story, rubber on the surface and things like that. So, I mean, we'll see what happens here, but yeah, I'm definitely looking at a few people in the list, and I think that they'll be pretty disappointed with the times they've got right now. I'll be looking for a few people to still improve.
Who are you looking for in particular, Hobbo, to move up the order?
I've got one eye on Josh Muggleton. We talked about him already, but I think that he's shown good pace in practice. I think he was sort of in the top 3 at the end of the practice session, and he had a bad race last week. We know how good Josh can be. We've seen him compete, at the highest level before. And after a bad round last week, I expected him to come out this week and absolutely, put it to the field. I'm expecting to run at the front. We also know Trans-Tasman Racing extremely good around here in the Pro Series last year. So with the help of the guys in his team, I would expect those guys to sort of be up the front here by the end of qualifying.
Just coming back to your point about the track conditions as well. So Phillip Island last week, what we saw was that the track cooled down quite substantially between the first and the second segment of qualifying. Not sure that we're going to get quite as much variation tonight. At the moment, ambient temperature 18 degrees, track temperature 20, which is already a good 10 degrees cooler than it was at Phillip Island last week. So it could be that the track evolution isn't as extreme as what we saw at Phillip Island, which might just help these drivers in this lower 50% of qualifying maybe stay a little bit closer to the faster 50% guys.
And you sort of talk about it as a top and bottom 50%, but it is after only one round too. So I think there's quite a few people here in this first group that are certainly capable of running right at the front. So sure, some of them you might slot into the bottom 50% of the field, but after one round, it's pretty hard to do that. And this track is obviously quite different too. So some people might be a little better here than they were at Phillip Island and vice versa. So it'll be really interesting to see how this plays out and see what sort of a mixture we get.
Just watching Dylan, he's just going to cross the line. Sure enough, he lit up the sectors. There was a purple sector 1, and then he's just gone straight to the top of the leaderboard. I think he was back in 19th or something. I thought I saw the number there. But yeah, that was a great lap, and now he's gone to P1, so he'd be absolutely stoked with that when we're only into a couple of minutes left of this session.
And he and his simrigs.com DPR teammate Andrew Dyson were very fast in the preliminary practice session that we had before getting into this qualifying session. So certainly those two cars are going to be among the front-running contenders tonight. And let's not forget that Andrew Dyson is one of the top drivers in the series, finishing on the podium at Phillip Island. So we expect both those cars to be contenders. Watching at the moment, Harrison Dengate currently scored down in position number 14 on a personal best sector through sector number 2. In fact, a lot of drivers on personal bests at the moment. So I think we could have a fair bit of chopping and changing at the top of the order throughout the closing 2 minutes of this session.
It's always stressful, isn't it, for these teams and, the drivers, if they know that they haven't been able to put down something decent. When you look at the clock and you've only got 2 minutes to go and it's a minute 30 plus round here, you've really probably only got one more shot at it. So, and, these guys need to sort of worry about where they are in the racetrack. You look at Muggleton, he's got a little bit of traffic in front of him, so I don't know if this is going to hurt him or hinder him, but he's just going to get through these last couple of turns and see if he can make that progression. He's in P8. He's got a clean on again, a little bit of aero push there, so you can see exactly what happened. He got a little bit wiggly on exit, so that hurt him as much as he was trying to get that little bit of an advantage off the aero. He did go to P2 though, so well done, Muggo.
Watch out for Kurt Stenberg because he's on a lap at the moment. Purple split through sector number 2, so he's potentially going to jump up the order as well, as we see that was a replay of, I think that was Dylan O'Shea. So this is the incident for Josh Muggleton that you were talking about. He did well to save that, but it cost him a lot of time. It looks cool, but it's not fast. Yeah, getting that sideways.
Exactly. I said that last week. I think it looks good on the slow-mos, but it looks terrible on the stopwatch. But imagine that, obviously he would have gone to the top of the toms with that car a little bit tidier on exit, but he'd be breathing a sigh of relief, that's for sure.
And interestingly enough, Kurt Stenberg still down in 8th position. So despite that very rapid second sector that we saw, didn't continue on in the final sector. So still sits down in position 8 so far in this session.
So 20 seconds to go now. The first lot of cars that are on track. Now, everyone, this is where they're panicking. If they haven't been able to put that lap down, then they know they're a little bit further in the grid than they'd like to be. It's only probably going to get worse from here because the next group are about to go out and then you're going to slide down the order a little bit more, and that makes your night so much more trickier. Oh, big wiggle off exit. Or maybe he's a little bit of showboating now. I think he felt the light was over, but he still managed to have P4 at the end of qualifying session. So that was a bit cool on exit, wasn't it, boys?
So that was also Josh Muggleton coming into the pits. So his session is done. That's Hayden Harrison that we're watching at the moment. Car number 96. Personal best split through sector number 1. Not quite an improvement in sector number 2. Currently sits in position 12 on the timesheets. Hayden Harrison moves up into the top 10, so was able to find a bit of time in the final sector.
You're finding now that there are. That's Loxton's head in the pit. So
oh, Sebastian Vardell jumps up to 3rd position in the dying stages of the session. So found a lot of time there on his final lap and goes within 300ths of a second of our provisional pole sitter, Dylan O'Shea.
Pretty impressive times, isn't it? From the top 3, look how close it is. You know, absolutely nothing in it. It's one, you know, light little tap of the brake less than the other car in front of you. Those splits, there's absolutely nothing in it. And then, you know, if this was the final qualifying, it'd be a point where Muggleton, if his car was a little bit, you know, tidier on exit, he would have had that pace anyway. But he'd be happy with that. I think all of them now, sort of, especially in the top 5 or 10, they're like right now the times turn as far as watching this next session to see where they start for the big race. So
Dylan O'Shea fastest to 1 minute 37.98. Josh Muggleton in second position at 1 minute 38.01. Sebastian Vardell third. Chris Ireland, who was on top early in the session, getting bumped back to position 4. And then it's Hayden Veld in 5th position. Back then to Brian Borg, Sebastian Flock, Aaron Borg in 8th position. Kurt Stenberg will not be happy to be down in 9th position, especially considering we have the top 50% still to run, and Hayden Harrison completing the top 10.
Any surprises there, Brenton? I mean, you know, you said you were trying to keep an eye on a few people, and you know yourself, you've been in a situation where you're in quali and things don't always go your way. There's some people will be kicking themselves, and some people will be happy with what they've been able to punch out.
Yeah, I think the obvious one there is Stenny. We sort of talked about him, but very similar boat to Muggo from last week. I mean, they both had disappointing rounds by their standards and would have been looking to come out and put a stamp on it this week. And I think he'll be pretty unhappy with being in 9th. We'll see how that stacks up, obviously, once everyone else goes out and does their laps. But very impressive from Vardell. That was a good lap to get him up into the top 3. That was a good one. And he should be pretty happy with that. I'm very interested to see how they stack up to the second group. I mean, in practice, we did see, I think it's about 10 cars go into the 37 bracket. So you kind of expect a similar number or perhaps more out of qualifying. So, you know, they're only the one here that managed to get down into that number. So whether or not they stand up, we'll soon find out.
We've got the Logitech G Aston Martin Vantage safety car just doing an observational lap of the circuit. Michael Schreier is the safety car driver this evening. We had one appearance in the race for the safety car in the previous round at Phillip Island, and it came at a pretty interesting time in terms of race strategy because it came pretty much right in the window for the second round of pit stops, and there were a number of drivers who were able to pit under the safety car. There were some drivers who had already completed their second pit stops before the safety car came out, and it set us up for a cracking sprint to the line. Gentlemen, do you reckon we'll have any safety car appearances tonight?
It's a bit like the $64 million question. Brenton, what would you think? Like, you guys as a team, you would probably take that in consideration as you prep for this week's race?
You'd be silly not to, calculate accordingly for a safety car, especially around here. I think that the likelihood around this track is probably definitely higher than Phillip Island, I would say. The proximity of the walls around here, much closer, and the technical nature of the track by comparison, I think the obvious ones is there's a couple of hairpins around here, particularly on lap 1. Be pretty hot spots to keep an eye out for. And I mean, a safety car, I would say a very, very good chance that you'll see one. And yeah, you absolutely need to factor that in, particularly late in the race safety cars. They're the ones that you really got to think about because they have a pretty big bearing on how the race plays out towards the end. One at the start, probably less so, but definitely if you get a late race safety car, that makes a big difference.
And without giving away too much of your team insight, when do we think possibly that drivers will be thinking about pit stops? Because obviously they've got to take that in consideration, and then their fuel management, their tyre wear. as a team, like I said, you don't want to give away your secrets, but any sort of idea of when these teams might be starting to think about pitting?
I haven't really been speaking to the guys actually, so I don't know what they've got planned. But I mean, I can speak from my own personal experience and what I'd be probably looking to do. And I mean, if you were to get a very early safety car, you'd certainly take the opportunity to jump on that, I think, and clear a CPS. You also need to be looking, from the end of the race backwards. So you look at your range on your fuel tank, which is somewhere in the range of 29 to 30 laps. You want to make sure that if a safety car comes out around then, that you can make that final stop and drive to the end. You don't want to have to serve another pit stop after a safety car when you can make it to the end from there. So it's a couple of factors that you probably really want to look out for. But I mean, you'd be reactive as far as safety cars go. Other than that, I mean, you probably look at an even wear tyre strategy for your pit stops, and then maybe depend a little bit, again, reactive on where you are on track, what's happening around you, that sort of stuff. You sort of got to be clever and think about it on the fly.
So the even wear tyre strategy is basically to pit on lap 15 and lap 30 and divide the race up into thirds with 2 15-lap stints and 1 14-lap stint. But we were talking about fuel range before, and we think that you can get about 29 laps out of a tank of fuel, which means that theoretically you could do both of your compulsory pit stops before lap 15 and make it home on fuel from that point. Now, obviously that's not the optimum strategy in terms of tyres, but if we get early safety cars, then people might be prepared to roll the dice, particularly if you're a bit further down the order. So you can pit as early as lap 1 for your first pit stop if you're that way inclined. And again, if you're buried in the field and maybe stuck in a bit of traffic, you might think about running that sort of alternate strategy just to try and get yourself a bit of clear air and a bit of track position.
Yeah, absolutely right. I mean, like I said, you don't want to end up in a position where late in the race you've got to do a green flag stop and others don't. So as far as safety car goes, you're definitely pitting if there's an early safety car. But to throw the curveball in there, if you do get a safety car around that critical lap and you pit, clear your CPS, but then there's another safety car a bit later in the race, you've got no... you've got to make a big decision. Do you come down and take a third stop to get the tyres, or do you run on an old tyre against some other guys that might come in and pit? So it's a really tricky one. It's always nice to say you might think you know what you're doing and you might get it right. But, I mean, ultimately, the beauty of motor racing is that a lot of it's up to chance. So we'll see how it plays out. But, yeah, there's a few ways that it could go for sure.
All right, so we're now underway for the second segment of qualifying for the top 50% drivers in the field. We saw that Andrew Dyson, who was the first driver out of the pits, had a slight brake lock-up heading into the hairpin, just locked the inside front wheel, but he was very quick in practice earlier on, as we mentioned. The fastest time from the lower 50% session, for those of you just joining us here on our live stream coverage, a minute 37.98 set by Dylan O'Shea, who happens to be the teammate of Andrew Dyson at the DPRSimRigs.com outfit. Other drivers to watch out for in the field, look out for Adam Briggs. We know he's a consistent front runner. Dylan Rudd, who was in the lead pack at Phillip Island last week, as was Rick Kuznetsov, and also Robert Gibbs, who was one of the stars of the race at Phillip Island. As we see that Andrew Dyson moves up to position number 13 on his first flying lap. Rehan Leonage up to 5th. Dylan Rudd goes second. Robert Gibbs slots into position 7. At this stage, nobody is faster than Dylan O'Shea, our fastest driver from qualifying segment number 1.
No one's faster, but look at the time.
Exactly.
Pretty impressive, isn't it?
They've matched each other to the thousandth, so depending on what timing screen you look at will determine who's got the edge there, but we'll see how that one shakes out. But that's very impressive to see 2 times exactly the same straight off the bat.
I haven't had any luxury this week to do any laps around this racetrack, so I'm interested about how much racetrack they can get away with using an exit, because there's a lot of cars running wide, and of course one of your fears is getting that off-track penalty when you're on such a restraint for time.
Well, that's exactly right, and there is a few spots where you just cannot get away with even a millimetre. So that's part of what makes these guys good, is that they can spend the time to really figure out where they can exploit the track limits, because you need to know that to be able to maximise a lap time. But of course, you're always right on the edge of exceeding those, and if you do step over in a couple of spots in particular, that you're going to nullify your lap straight away, and you can't afford to do it in a rapid fire session like this.
And this track, it really does invite drivers to explore the track limits, doesn't it? Because it's got wide curves, it's got those big concrete painted extensions on the side of the road. So it's a place where you can explore the track limits without there being huge consequences in terms of damage to your car.
That's exactly right. I mean, one of the perfect examples on this track is that the last two corners on the track is sort of a double right-hander, but if you even step over the white line there, you'll pick up an off-track. But the exit of turn one, you can sort of go four wheels over the exit onto the exit curb and not trigger an off-track. So you sort of got to learn the intricacies of it as a driver and understand where you can get away with it. This is a big mess right here. Like I talked about before, people trying to clear a slow lap before hitting a flyer. So, but yeah, you need to learn, you know, the inside curb here that we're seeing is one of the places you can take a lot, but right here, right there between the two right-handers, you can't really exceed track limits there at all.
And that's where it got my attention in the last lap, just on the first corner, just how wide some of the cars were going. Now, obviously, if you're on an out lap, you don't have to worry about your off tracks there, so you can just get out of harm's way and get out of people's way. So, but yeah, I think that's always been the one interesting thing, is seeing how much you can get away with it, because like you said, if you don't exploit it, everyone else will, and it's going to put you at a disadvantage. So, all right, how's the times there, boys? Like we're not seeing Muggleton slip right down like we saw, and we touched on how different the track is, you know, what we had for Phillip Island last week. So Muggleton will be pretty happy with that still at the moment, holding on to P3.
And it's interesting that there hasn't been the massive improvement session to session that we saw at Phillip Island. Like, you'll remember last week in the second segment of qualifying, pretty much as soon as the top 50% runners had done their first flying lap, Josh Muggleton, who was fastest in the lower 50% session, had been bundled all the way back to 15th or 16th. We're not seeing that pattern repeating itself tonight.
Yeah, he'd be stoked with that too, wouldn't he?
Just noticing that Kenneth Ladder's had a big moment. He's torn that car up pretty bad. I think that's going to be the end of his session.
So Kenneth Latter yet to get a time on the board as well. So if that's the case, he'll be starting at the tail end of the field. And there's still some other big names who've not yet got times on the board. Brad Rattu, Thomas Hinz, Sean McNamara, Luke Mitchinson. Adam Briggs hasn't got a time on the board yet, and in fact he's just chalked up an off track, so his current lap will be invalidated. In fact, only 4 cars out of this top 50% segment of qualifying have made it into the top 10 so far.
We touched on this a little bit last week, where it's important as a team and as a driver that you get a banker down. Like, the first thing you want to do is just basically get a time down and then improve it, especially in such a short session like 15 minutes. You know, get a time that's there or thereabouts just to get you in the show, and then work on improving it, because no doubt that's something that's huge that plays on their minds, especially when we're only talking like a quick 15-minute session.
And especially so in this session as well, we're still looking here and track conditions haven't changed. It's still sort of 18 degrees air and 20-degree track temp. So you're not fighting against a track that's heating up and getting slower necessarily. So you're a little bit more luxury to perhaps approach the session that way. But also at the same time, you can't afford to leave anything out there. I mean, you know, half a second or something like that, it's half the field, you know. So you can't afford to take it too easy. But the risk is that, like you say, if you overstep the margin, you're at the very back, and you just can't afford to do that.
And Rehan Leonage now goes to the top at 1 minute 37.8. So finally displaces Dylan O'Shea in car number 79, the Pursuit Sim Racing entry. It looks there like Dylan Rudd was potentially on another fast lap as well, and in fact he's gone very fast through sector number 2, Dylan Rudd, but not able to improve in the final sector.
That's an extremely impressive lap by Rehan. He's a guy who is on the up and up and continues to impress. That's a really good lap, and he'll be very happy with that. That may stand with only 5 minutes left in the session. Also saw Luke Mitchinson and Damon Johnson also jump into the 10. So a few guys starting to make some moves and make some gains now.
I think a lot of them will be breathing that sigh of relief too if they know that they're sort of in the top 5 and 10 at this point of the session. They'd probably think to themselves that they're pretty safe to stay there or thereabouts. Like we touched on, we're not seeing that big dramatic change in the timing. So I think there's a few people there who'll be quite happy with the way it's all playing out. With the only sort of what are we in the last sort of 5 minutes to go.
I think if you're one of the drivers that's on the track at the minute, absolutely. If you're sitting in the pits, I wouldn't maybe be quite so comfortable because anything can happen. But if you've put down a good banker lap like you talked about before and you're sitting in the top 10, you got the chance to go out and have another go, but you can expect that that lap is going to be 110%. You've got nothing to lose. You may as well absolutely send it. So I think there's potential for a couple of those guys to go even quicker here. But if you're sitting in the pits, I'd still be pretty nervous. There's plenty of time for someone to go out and still improve. So there's a couple of guys there that I think definitely still won't be happy. They're sitting right at the back, haven't even set times. So just see if they can actually get out there and put down a good time or not.
Yeah, and among those guys, you've got names like Adam Briggs, who finished just off the podium at Phillip Island last week in 4th position, and Rick Kuznetsov. Those drivers yet to put a time on the board, so they need to get on with it because there's only, well, less than 4 minutes now remaining in this session.
And from what I can understand, Briggs' session is done, so he looks like he'll be starting at the back. Kuznetsov is absolutely one of those guys that you would expect to be, there or thereabouts, right near the front. So huge pressure on him here to get this lap in.
He comes across the line as we speak, but that was an out lap, so it's not a lap that will be counted. So he starts off on a hot lap now, and this you would have to say will probably be his last opportunity to get a time on the board. But Adam Briggs, the news is his qualifying session looks to be done, so he'll be starting at the rear of the field. Brad Rattu moves up to position number 6, managing to get a time on the board, so good news for the 9.5 SimSport driver there in car number 938.
Just watching Rick at the start of that lap, he was really conservative at turn 1, didn't take it anywhere near as much of the exit curve as he could have. So I suspect he might be bordering on the side of safety here, just hoping he can put even a banker lap for him might be good enough to get him in, that top 15 range. So I think he's taking it a little safe, but he's obviously fallen foul of some track limits so far in this session. So he's in a really awkward spot right here where we know how fast he can go, but he just can't afford to not set a time.
It's crazy, isn't it, when you think about, sorry, Lockie, but when these drivers are under pressure, it doesn't take much to ruin a lap. Like, it could be just, you might get caught up by some traffic. You might just run just a tiny bit wide and then get yourself an off track, and then that cancels those laps. And then, of course, depending on how much tyre life you've taken out, whether you're halfway through the lap, you might just abort and head straight back to the pits, or you might have to go around and go again. And before you know it, the clock's against you. So it starts to be a little bit stressful, but hopefully Rick, as he comes out of this last turn, can put something decent down as we wait for the times to tick over. What's that going to give him?
It moves him up to position 12. So not bad. Probably would have wanted a little bit better, but at least it gets him in the game. And we just saw a message come through there from race control. Adam Briggs' night has gone from bad to worse, just to rub salt into the wound. He was already going to be starting at the back of the grid anyway, but he's also now been given a drive-through penalty, which you'll have to serve in the race for a dangerous re-entry to the racetrack and getting involved in an incident with another competitor. So Adam Briggs, starting at the back of the grid, has to do a drive-through penalty. You would have to say it's going to be a pretty uphill battle for him tonight.
Oh, absolutely. That's huge, isn't it, Hobbo? Like, that's, he'd be praying for a safety car now.
He's got no hope but to hope for a safety car now. He's, clear that on the first lap and just hope for the best. But my friends over at SSR not doing me any favours here in the booth, because that was 2 SSR cars that got together to cause that. So no good for the team there. But he's got a long night ahead of him now. And we talk about, being consistent, banking points and things like that. I mean, he can't afford to just throw the towel in here and not bother. He has to go out and just try and hope that it goes his way here in the race and that he can at least salvage something from this one.
It's a bit like he's at the point where it's just got to stop the bleeding. Oh, there's that little bit of dirt kicking up on the exit there. Didn't help his lap time. But, yeah, it's almost to the point where he's just got to stop the bleeding and make the most of tonight now. Like, forget about quality. Yep, you're going to have a shocker of a start. You're going to be down the back. You're going to take that penalty. But just put it all behind you, make the most of it, and just push on and see how the race plays out.
Yeah, I think it's a good test of the mental fortitude now, because it's easy to get yourself in in the wrong mental state after something like that happens. I mean, you can't do anything about it now. You just got to move on. And, you know, for his sake, I hope things go his way in the race. But I mean, he can't do anything about it at this point. So you just go out, do what you can, and put it behind you.
Damien Johnston, good lap right at the death of the session at the checkered flag. It's enough to move the number 033 car up to position number 2 within 600ths of a second of Rehan Leonage. So good late lap there for Damien Johnston. Checkered flag is out on this session, so the drivers will get to complete the lap that they're on at the moment. Rehan Leonage, 1 minute 37.82 as fastest in the session. Johnston second. Robert Gibbs, one of the star performers from last week at Phillip Island, moves up into position number 3. I'm going to go back to Dylan O'Shea in 4th position, Dylan Rudd in 5th spot, Josh Muggleson, Sebastian Vandel, Brad Rattu, Luke Mitchinson and Chris Ireland completing the top 10. So boys, overall thoughts on that qualifying session? It's a bit of a mixed up grid, isn't it, compared to what we had at Phillip Island last week?
Yeah, I think there'd be some drivers breathing a sigh of relief. Like Muggleton's managed to just miss out on the top 5, so P6, he'd be happier with that. But then his teammate Stenberg is all the way back in 18th. So, I mean, he didn't have the best of runs in that first session, but it wasn't all that bad. But they'd certainly paid the price when the second group came out.
There's going to be some drivers who will probably be experimenting with some alternative strategies to try and move themselves up the order, and Kurt Stenberg's definitely one of the drivers who falls into that category. A couple of others who are a bit further back than we'd expected. Rick Kuznetsov, after his performance at Phillip Island, where he had some really good speed, I think we probably would have expected him to be a bit further up than 12th. Ditto Andrew Dyson, finished 3rd at Phillip Island, but only managing to qualify 13th tonight. And then, as we've mentioned, some big names starting a bit further back in the pack, including Adam Briggs, who will start this race out of grid position 38 and also has to serve a drive-through penalty. He faces an uphill battle to get any sort of result out of this evening. But congratulations to Rehan Leonage. He is your pole sitter for round number 2 of the Logitech G Supercar Pro Invitational Qualifying Series here at Hockenheim.
He'd be pretty happy with that after he came away with a 5th place position at Phillip Island. So to be at the top of the leaderboard there, I think he'd be absolutely stoked coming into round 2.
Good mixture of cars within the top 10 and a good mixture of teams within the top 10 as well. We've got a couple of Pursuit Sim Racing drivers there. We do have Damien Johnston for Synergy Sim Racing. Evolution Racing Team being represented by Robert Gibbs, who flew their flag so strongly at Phillip Island last week. And we'll not be too far away from getting tonight's race underway. 44 laps the distance around the Hockenheim Rim. 2 compulsory pit stops to be taken by each driver as well. And here is your grid. Rehan Leonage on pole. Damien Johnston alongside him on the front row. Back then to Robert Gibbs and Dylan O'Shea. Dylan Rudd and Josh Muggleson out of positions 5 and 6. Then it's Sebastian Vandel, Brad Rattu, Luke Mitchinson, Chris Ireland, and then Sean McNamara and Rick Kuznetsov rounding out our top dozen competitors.
How are the nerves now, you reckon, Brenton, as all these guys start to grid up and get ready for this race? A 4-round series, and after tonight, that's the halfway mark of this championship that only started last week.
Yeah, you're right. It's sitting on the grid is the worst time because you got time to think about how all the things you can get wrong. But yeah, it's, you know, like you say, it's important to capitalise on a decent start here. If you're up near the front, they're not the easiest cars to get off the line. These guys have all done it plenty of times now, but it is very, very easy to get it wrong. You want to keep an eye out for guys getting big wheel spin and going nowhere here at the start. I mean, it's a pretty big stage for some of these guys, and the nerves will certainly be up. Be interesting to see, you know, who can move forward from deep in the field. But I'm really impressed with Rehan on the pole. That's a great lap, and a lot of pressure on young shoulders here for him, you know, to lead off the front here and get a good start and try and get away cleanly.
I think that's one thing we touched on last week, is that, yes, it's a 4-round series to get into the championship, but having that pressure on these guys, that will serve them well in the championship throughout the year. So if you're able to progress, it's not going to be an easy target. So that pressure in this series is going to really benefit them throughout the year.
Absolutely, and yeah, you need to be able to do that. You need to be able to, not make mistakes when the pressure's on.
So all set for a race start here at the Hockenheim Ring. We are in the hands of the stars. This is round 2 of the Logitech G Supercar Pro Invitational Qualifying Series. What is going to fall our way tonight? How are the different strategies going to play out? Can some of the drivers that had tough rounds at Phillip Island last week recover, put some points in the bank, and launch themselves into the coveted top 20 tonight? That's the position that you'll have to be in at the end of the 4 rounds, inside the top 20 in the points to buy yourself a ticket to competing in the 2023 Logitech G Supercars Pro Invitational. Lights out and away we go. Beautiful start from Leonardo. Not such a good start off the front row from Robert Gibbs. And look at the lead that Leonardo already has through turn number 1. It's good, well clear of the field. So we see a couple of cars running wide at turn 1.
Yeah, that was Muggleton involved. I don't know if there was a little bit of door handle stuff, but it gets real tight through here. These guys will definitely be holding their breath. There's some cars with some good battle damage. We're only into turn 2.
And if you think that it's been chaos in turns 1 and 2, wait until you see what happens when they get down to the hairpin. It's a big braking zone. All of the cars tightly bunched together on this opening lap. It's an opportunity to make up positions if you're close to the car in front. Our top 6 or 7 runners all get through cleanly, but you can see that there's people going for big sends down the inside into the hairpin. Do they all get through cleanly?
Oh, there was some carnage back there. I think I saw a little bit of smoke. Yep, there's a car facing around the wrong way. It's a hornet's nest back there, and when they're coming into such a hard braking zone and you got all those cars banched up, it is a recipe for disaster.
Brett Loxton was one of the cars that was involved back there. I'm not surprised that they didn't all get through there cleanly. It is just such a big stop there from quite a high top speed that you are running at down into the hairpin, and they're running 2 and 3 wide on the braking approach. Leonage is your race leader. He got a really, really good start and pulled clear of his main opponents, but throughout the rest of the lap, his rivals have been able to make up some time. Gibbs has closed to within 0.4 of a second, and we've got Dylan Rudd up to position number 3.
Mate, this is a great camera angle. This really gives a good indication of how this field is already spread out after one lap. Have a look at them. They're all single file. There's a little bit of carnage throughout that lap, so it has really spread out this field.
Big loser on the opening lap, 2 of them. Damien Johnston got an absolute shocker of a start and has fallen all the way back to 17th position after starting on the front row of the grid. And Josh Muggleton has fallen back 5 positions as well. We saw that he was involved in a bit of drama at turn 1. So a couple of drivers who started inside the top 10 falling back outside of the top 10 after our first completed lap.
Yeah, it was a disaster for Muggo. He was involved with Johnston at turn 1 after the bad start from Damien off the launch, and he got pushed wide at turn 1, actually had to serve a slowdown as well. So lap 1 slowdowns are a nightmare, and unfortunately for him, that's what he's had to do. So he's dropping right back down, and hopefully he can find his feet here and move back forwards.
Under all sorts of pressure for Dyson at the moment. Dyson was just about alongside him as they headed into the hairpin, and just ahead of those 2 drivers, that was Kuznetsov looking up the inside of Mitchinson. That's the contest for 9th and 10th position as we ride on board with Andrew Dyson. The simrigs.com DPR entry putting the pressure on Josh Muggleton on lap 2.
Yeah, I was just thinking in Muggo's spot, he's like, he hasn't had the best of starts. Now he's got a little bit of traffic, so what he just needs to do is just get himself settled down, not worry about what's happened at the start. He's a good driver. We know what sort of pace he's got on board, and just start thinking about how he's going to go about picking them off one car at a time. But, look at the understeer as we go on visor cam there with Dyson. But just you can see how much these cars struggle a little bit when they've got that aero push.
Another interesting thing I've noticed is that Adam Briggs does not yet seem to have served that drive-through penalty. He's actually moved up to position number 30 after the first couple of laps. So you would think that Adam Briggs would want to serve his drive-through, as he does now do that at the end of lap number 2. So Adam Briggs touring the pit lane. He'll fall right to the back of the pack. And as you've pointed out, will be relying on a safety car to get himself back into the game from here.
Now we've got to change of position. So Gibbs up in front now as our race leader on lap number 3. But yeah, ideally you want to get that out of the way. He would be absolutely praying for a safety car now. So he knows that the rest of that night is really much reliant on that, because there's no way if this thing goes green that he's going to be able to bounce back to a decent position.
It's a good move there from Gibbs to relieve Leonage of the race lead, and he'll now put his head down and try and pull clear of the rest of the field. Leonage coming under pressure from Rudd. Pretty tight contest.
There's cars back there, looks like at the hairpin. There's someone pointing around the wrong direction, so there's been drama back there. That's Loxton. So, man, oh man, here we are, lap number 3. It's really easy, though, to lock a brake. Probably, Brenton, you'd know with doing laps around here, that if you're under the pump and you're having a red-hot go, if you just pinch a tyre, sometimes it's so easy just to lock a brake and tag the competitor in front of you.
No, it's very easy to do, and because you're driving right on the limit, I mean, a tiny little mistake like that, a pinch brake, and you're off. Like, there's just no stopping it and saving it from that point. And, you know, being a hairpin, if there's anyone in front of you, they're just, you know, innocent victims at that point.
Focusing on this battle just on the fringe of the top 10. This is an angry pack of cars, isn't it? You've got Muggleton, Dyson, Veld, Stenberg trying to make up some spots as well. He's already moved up to 14th position after starting from 18th. He'll get another spot here as well as he gets up the inside of Hayden Veld. Nice move there from Kurt Stenberg.
I love the guy, but I'm not saying nothing.
He's gotten off to a good start, up 5 spots already. So I think he's one of those guys we expect to run near the front. So be keeping an eye on him to keep making passes like that as the race goes on.
Yeah, watch his replay. This is his dive under brakes. Look at that. That car looks really good and settled under brakes. He was able to go deep, and the way that car just squatted and sat down as soon as he got on the brake pedal, that gave him real confidence into the corner. So the car looks good.
Yeah, it looks really planted, that's for sure.
Is there much difference, Hobbo, between a good qualifying car and a good race car? Because already we're saying that there were some cars that seem to have really good speed over one lap in qualifying, but in race conditions maybe they're not quite so strong, and conversely there's other drivers who qualified a bit further back but seems to be making pretty good progress.
Yes and no. I mean, typically if you're good in qualifying, you're pretty good in the race as well, but I think that a lot of it's to do with the pressure, and it's probably more so to do with the individual drivers, to be honest. I mean, they get out on track and some people are just better in race conditions than qualifying. We see that a lot where some people, you know, can't really qualify that well, but they can race a lot better. But there's lots of different factors that go into it. I wouldn't say necessarily car setup is a huge one that you see a lot, but I mean, certainly that might have some effect for some people.
We're a little bit surprised that Gibbs is starting to open up that gap. I think he's enjoying the fresh air that he's got, because it looks like now he's starting to open up that margin to almost a second. So he's actually looking quite comfortable, and it's a good feeling too when you know you've got a little bit of pace on board and you look in your rearview mirror and you're starting to leave those competitors behind a little bit. That's sort of a little feather in his cap. He'd be pretty happy with that. We know it's still early stages, but it's a good feeling as a driver.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And, you know, you can see that the pack's starting to fragment just a little bit in a few different spots. He's got a nice little gap there over Rayhan in second. And as you look further back, I mean, on the last lap, Sean McNamara was the quickest of all these guys, but there's a bit of a gap forming behind him. So if you can start to build a gap and break up the pack behind you, I mean, it gives you so much more flexibility with your pit stops and takes a lot of the pressure off too, where, you know, if you make a little mistake, you're not going to lose, you know, 10 spots or something. So for him, the pressure will come off the longer into the run he goes if he can keep on sort of pulling that gap out.
Oh, how's this pack of cars? Oh, they're all going side by side. Oh, that was Stenny that was almost, he got shoved wide. He didn't go off from the gravel, so thankfully. Oh, but the big dive. We've already seen strong braking performances from Stenny already, but man, that was good. He's going to get these. Oh, he's got one more position back, and side by side it again through the S's. This is tricky, and we spoke about how tricky it is when you get too wide off here and get an off track.
Wow, it's still side by side on the exit of the final corner as well. Josh Muggleson, the other big loser out of that sequence of corners, because he got passed by Andrew Dyson and then just hung out to dry, and somehow Kurt Stenberg has managed to pull that off. He's gained 3 positions in the last third of that lap. Not over yet for Josh Muggleson either, because he is running side by side with Luke Mitchinson on the run down into turn number 10, and behind him there's a battle as well. That's Hayden Veld and Sebastian Flock getting stuck into it. So this big gaggle of cars fighting ferociously for track position just outside the top 10.
Stenny Singh looks really good on brakes too, so I think he'll be happy now that he'll be looking, that he looks in his rearview mirror and that he sees his teammate there. But now we see car 35 has got a 15-second penalty, so that's again, contact. We're seeing contact too on the racetrack. That was just looked like people just trying to shuffle for position into the hairpin.
So the message there from race control was it's a penalty for car 033, which is Damien Johnston. So and we saw that he got a terrible start, heaps of wheel spin off the line, and then contact with Josh Muggleton. So the officials have intervened and they've decided that it was Damien Johnston who was at fault for that collision, and he'll cop a penalty. So his night goes from bad to worse.
Just going back to that last lap, these guys going side by side through the right-hander heading into the arena section here. That's just really brave stuff. That is one of the hardest corners on the track. It's almost off camber towards the exit of the corner, and it's very, very easy to run not only wide of the white line, but up on and over the curb and even beyond the AstroTurf into the gravel out there. So for those guys to go side by side, it's very, very brave stuff, and to get through there the way they did was actually very impressive.
Nice to see a little bit of respect between the guys too, because it's so easy to door someone in that part of the racetrack and just blame the racetrack, or a little bit of contact there with Rick Kasexov. But yeah, it's so easy to blame the way the racetrack is through that section. And if you were to door someone and say, look, yeah, it's a little bit tight, it was a bit tricky, but for them to all get through there unscathed and give each other plenty of racing room, that was really cool to watch.
Exactly right. And the further extension of that too is like you can't afford a penalty, so you don't want to shove someone off and risk getting a slap on the wrist from the stewards. But even beyond that too, like a little bit of door-to-door contact seems fairly harmless, but if you start to tear up the side of the car, especially with this model of the supercar on iRacing, it does tend to hurt the car's performance. The side damage on these will really hurt you in a straight line. So you don't want to be making contact where you don't need to. Like, it's just, you want to try and keep as clean as you can. And you've also got to race these guys for another couple of rounds at least, and potentially into the Pro Series. You don't want to make any enemies out there either.
Yeah, that's right. I was looking at Mitchison, who's in 15th, just a couple of spaces up, and you can see how much battle damage he's got. It's scarred up the left-hand side. So exactly what you were saying, you don't want to see it. As we go to our helicopter cam, it's the wrong side. But yeah, you'll see, look how much battle damage he's got, and it's only lap 7 of 44.
Yeah, it's a long race to drive around with a damaged car. I mean, he's in a bit of an awkward spot. He was just in front of that real angry pack, and they all sort of ganged up on him a little bit there, and he got wide a couple of times, had a bit of a moment, and lit up the rear tyres. And the way that the tyres are in these cars as well, you pay the price for that. You excite the tyres just a little bit. It'll take you a whole lap to sort of get them back under you. And when you just got guys constantly, trying to make their way through, and you're on the back foot, it compounds. It gets worse and worse and worse. So he just needs to settle in here and hope that the damage on that car is not too bad to slow him down, but it's a long way to go from here, to your point.
Starting to see some pit strategies playing out as well. That was Sebastian Flock coming down at pit lane to take the first of his 2 compulsory pit stops. We've got Thomas Freeman coming into the pits as well. So a few drivers starting to get out of traffic as Dylan Rudd gets up the inside of Rehan Leonage at the hairpin, just managed to get it stopped, gets the move done, through up into 2nd position.
I imagine we're going to see a lot of passes done there. It's probably one of the easiest ones when you can carry that toe, but of course, like we've seen, you can carry so much speed there, make that move under brakes on the inside, but you make that slight little mistake under brakes and you can run wide, or the worst case scenario, you can tap the competitor and cop a penalty. But it's a really good opportunistic part of the racetrack for getting positions done.
He obviously felt like he's getting held up too. I mean, it's a big risk to go for a move when you're at the front of the field like this. I mean, you got to pick your battles. He obviously felt like he was getting held up. He was the fastest car on the last lap, so he must feel like he can go to the front here and pull away. So we'll keep an eye on him.
You find yourself panicking a little bit too, because you look forward and you see the race leader Gibbs, who's now got it out to 1.3 seconds, and he probably thinks to himself, I don't really want to stay back behind here. Yes, it's probably not a bad pace, but when you start to see the leader starting to disappear, I guess that starts to put pressure on him, and he wants to get the job done.
Yeah, you're definitely thinking about that. I mean, it depends how you approach the race. So ultimately here, you're trying to... That was a big moment. That was a huge moment there through turn 1. But yeah, you only need to lock yourself into the top 20, so you need to bank good points. But these guys are race drivers, aren't they? Like, ultimately they're here to win. So if you see the guy in the lead driving away and you think that you've got a chance to win this race, you do not want to see him driving away into the distance.
watching at the bottom of the screen a replay, and that was our race leader Robert Gibbs absolutely throwing it across the curb on the exit of turn 1, as did the 8 or 9 drivers behind him. Like you said there before, Hobbo, they're fairly generous with the track limits penalties there at turn number 1, so you can use a fair bit of road on the exit and get away with it. This is a bit further back in the pack, back to Michael Taliancic, who's currently in 17th position. Luke Mitchison, since having that contact, he's been really bundled back down the order, so that damage to the side of his car is obviously affecting its performance.
Yeah, which is a shame. I mean, he qualified so well, and it's still a long way to go, but if the car is damaged, I mean, it's not going to get any better from here.
That.
And that's another car that's got some pretty good damage on it as well. That thing will not be at 100%. And yeah, with so many laps to go, you don't want to be up against it.
And that's not just like left side, that's front damage. That left front is caved in too. So, yeah, you can probably get away with it if it's just the left-hand side, but when it starts to affect the splitter, that's when it makes your day just that little bit more tricky.
Yeah, and if there's any kind of steering damage in on that thing too, that's going to be a nightmare to drive. I don't know that that's quite bad enough that the steering will be out, but once that starts to happen, the mental factor to trying to drive a car without straight steering is hard enough, let alone what actual performance damage that has caused as well.
The battle up here with Gibbs, we said before it was 1.8 seconds. Now Rudd's closed that down to just almost half a second now. So looks like the guys behind him now are thinking, right, we're probably getting close to thinking about pit stops. We roughly broke it down that if it was going to be a 2-stop strategy, if you did it in an even race, you'd probably go to about 15 and then 30. But obviously these things will change on the fly. But perhaps Rudd's just like, well, I've got a little bit of pace. We'll probably know that we're close to pit stops. If he's got a little bit of tyre in his back pocket, it's probably best time to use it up now.
That's one of the beauties as well with this format, is that you don't have to do a full fuel run unless a safety car falls at the right time. So you can afford to probably use up a little bit of your tyres if you want. You don't have to do full fuel runs here. So, I mean, these guys will be able to go out and attack if that's how they're going to approach the race with the strategy.
Rudd is definitely pushing at the moment, no question about that, and he's made up a lot of time on the last lap on Robert Gibbs, so he got past Leonage, and Rudd now putting the hammer down and closing in on our race leader Robert Gibbs. Been interesting to compare their lap times as they come through to complete lap number 10.
Yeah, I did notice that. I think that the Gibbs may have had a bit of a moment on that last lap. He certainly lost a fair bit of ground there in one lap, and yeah, when you look at the lap times for it, particularly the guys behind made big gains on him. So don't know if that was a little error or if his tyres might be going away or something else, but we know how fast he can be, but then again we know that Dylan's also very, very rapid. So interesting to see here if he can get up there and actually make a pass, or if he's going to attack, or if he's just going to sit behind until the pit stops.
How tricky is it, Brenton, from a race driver's point of view when you're leading and you've got someone that's just sort of getting a little bit larger in the rear view mirror, that you're starting to get that pressure from behind? How hard is it to block that out?
It's difficult to keep your eyes forward, that's for sure. It does have an effect, but I mean, you get a pretty good idea. It's worse if you know that your car's going away. Like if you can feel like you're losing time because your car's not so good, then it's a lot worse. But it's something that you got to sort of learn to deal with, especially if you want to run at the front. You got to be able to block that out as best you can, and particularly here as well. Like it's early, you don't need to fight too hard as well. So it's once you start seeing them fill up the mirrors and moving out and approaching the braking zones, and you start second guessing whether or not they're actually going to have a move or a dive on you at some point. That's when it starts to get a lot harder to keep your focus and eyes forward.
And another drive-through penalty coming up for car number 269. That'll be Kenneth Latter for contacts with Brett Loxton. So we saw that Brett Loxton was in the wars on a couple of occasions down at the hairpin, and it turns out that one of those incidents was caused because of contacts with Kenneth Latter. So Latter will be taking a tour of the pit lane.
Just back to the front, Gibbs responded on that lap. He's put down a good time there that's matching what the guys behind him have been doing the few laps previous. So he's responded and upped the pace here. So looks like he's he's decided that he needs to push a little harder and try and keep those guys behind.
You as a driver, Brenton, do you like to have that information if you're in the position that Gibbs is in? Do you want that feedback and how the guys behind you are racing, or do you like to be left alone and just deal with it?
I think everyone's a little different. Like me personally, I don't run with a spotter. I never sort of have, so I don't get anyone feeding me that information. But I make sure I run with telemetry and I keep an eye on that stuff myself. So I've got a good understanding of what's going on, like lap speed and things like that relative to others, and particularly when you're looking for, you know, the early pit stop, how's the speed relative to the guys further back in the field. We're seeing Dyson's been down the lane and he's just lit up the timesheet. So you're sort of mindful of that sort of stuff in the car. You want to know that information, but some people prefer just to block it all out and just drive as hard, as fast as they can. They don't want to know. So I think that's a personal preference thing, really.
So these top 5 cars are separated by only a couple of seconds. Who blinks first here in terms of pit strategy? Well, we might be just about to get the answer to that question. It's Dylan O'Shea who pits out of position number 4. So Dylan O'Shea is going to go for the undercut strategy here. He's going to take on a fresh set of Dunlop tyres, squirt some E85 fuel into the simrigs.com DPR Mustang and see if he can undercut the drivers that he was battling against.
I think that's a smart call too, and we talked about this before the race, but when you look at the race, from back to front here, we're about 32 laps to go, thereabouts, so we're getting right near that window where if a safety car is to come out, you could come in here, fill up, go to the end and not have to pit again. So you want to make sure you've cleared your first stop. I'm quite surprised actually, we're looking at nearly 20 plus cars that still haven't made their first stop yet. I would have expected perhaps to have seen most people through the lane by now.
I think the benefit of him too is that he was in that, it wasn't a gaggle of cars, but they were all sort of nose to tail. So if he felt that he probably had a little bit more pace, the perfect time is to get that pit stop done first, have an attack on fresher tyres. And if these guys stretch it out for the next few laps, he might find himself in a position where he jumps them.
Oh, you're absolutely right. I mean, we're looking at lap speed here at the moment. It's sort of maybe about a second to gain, it looks like, on a green tyre. So if you can get in, we talked about there's such a small gap covering those top 5. If you can get in and get 1 or 2 green tyre laps over these guys, you'll jump most of them. So interesting to see what happens once they pit, how it looks. He's come straight into traffic though.
Yeah, that's the problem for Dylan O'Shea. He's come out in traffic and that is going to compromise his outlap and severely, you would have to say, take away from his chances of undercutting those drivers that he was battling against. So yes, he's got the advantage of fresh tyres, but he's also got the disadvantage of being stuck in traffic, as we see our top 3 drivers, 3 out of the top 4 drivers, I should say, have all elected to respond. So Rehan Leonage is in, Dylan Rudd is in, and Brad Ratu is in as well. Robert Gibbs, well, he's leading. He's got clear track and he's decided to keep going. He's not having to battle against anybody else at the moment. He's got plenty of space to keep punching out fast and consistent laps, so he figures that his best option right now is just to stay on the racetrack.
Absolutely.
If it stays green, that's probably the right call, but if you get a safety car here, he's going to be compromised. So it's a tough one, because if he comes in, he's going to come out in traffic by the look of it. So it's a hard call to make.
And that may be what he may be getting feedback from the team, I'm not sure, but he might be thinking if those guys are rejoining and they're in traffic, it might be his chance to just pull away a little bit. But exactly right. It's catch-22, whether you stay out there and make that little bit of position, but you don't want that safety car.
Interesting to compare the pit stop times for those cars that just came down pit lane. The fastest of them, Rehan Leonage, 11.2 seconds, so he took on a relatively light fuel load. 13.6 seconds for Dylan O'Shea, 19.5 seconds for Dylan Rudd. So Rudd has taken on more fuel compared to those cars that he was battling against.
Yeah, so that sounds like the guys in the teams and in the ears are paying attention to what's going on. They've short-fueled themselves there to hopefully keep themselves out of traffic by the look of that. So smart call, I think, and I think that's probably the best way to approach it right here.
I do love these parts of the race where you've got all these different strategies starting to play out. You've got people sweating it about whether there's going to be a safety car that could throw everything up in the air. Oh, a big wiggle there for Muggleton as he comes out of turn number 1. So he now finds himself in position 2. Obviously, there's a lot of pit stops that are starting to play out. So, and again, like we touched on, these guys don't want to leave it too late, because you'd hate to be stuck in a position where you get caught out with a safety car and still find yourself where you still have to make those 2 compulsory stops when a lot of the field have only got 1 to go.
So here is our race leader, Robert Gibbs. So the top 9 cars then yet to take their first compulsory pit stop in this race. You'd have to say that Robert Gibbs won't be too far away, because the drivers who have pitted will be starting to get some clear track now and starting to punch out some fast lap times. Rayhan Leonage, the best of the cars that's done its first pit stop, currently sitting in 10th position, but as we just discussed, he took on less fuel than his opponents in that first pit stop. This is a feisty battle at the moment. Josh Muggleton, Kurt Stenberg, Brian Borg and Hayden Veld. This is the battle for position 2 on the racetrack at the moment.
Yeah, no doubt there'd be some chatter between those TTR teammates with Muggleton. We'll see how much he's struggling just to get the power down. So he may be in a position where he's hurting Stenberg. He probably looks like he's going to fire into pit lane. Yep. Oh, struggled to get it in there too. So, yeah, that was probably a little bit of communication between TTR teammates and just letting him know that I'm going to fire into the lane, but it did hold up Stenberg a little bit. Oh,
that's a big moment. Don't doubt the car control from Josh Muggleton, ever.
And the beauty is that he knows he's pitting. So, oh, that's hurt him too. We just saw that he's had to pull reverse and back up into his stall. So that'll give him a little bit of a time penalty there. But, yeah, his tyres, he knew he was pitting. So it was just getting on the throttle, using them up, and then get to the pit lane.
And while that was all happening, our race leader, Robert Gibbs, has come into the pit lane as well. Very long stop for Robert Gibbs, 25.4 seconds. So either he's taken on a lot of fuel, or he might have had a bit of a pit lane entry mistake like Muggleton as well.
So I was just watching behind Stenberg. I thought it was going to be deja vu back to Phillip Island. It looked like he was going to get a tag there under brakes, but side by side there through the corners, that's brave stuff. But yeah, I don't think it'll be too much longer before you start to see the rest of the field pit. Here it is, lap 16. They've probably gone a little bit longer than we all expected because of the threat of that safety car that could really turn this thing upside down.
So it's interesting because he's taken on so much fuel in that pit stop, Robert Gibbs. He's fallen all the way back to 8th position out of the cars that have done their first compulsory pit stop. So that decision to take on more fuel, it has buried him in the pack, Robert Gibbs. I would have thought that maybe he would have taken on a bit less fuel and given himself track position to ensure he could keep punching out those fast lap times at the front of the field. But obviously, he and his team are confident that they can jump back ahead of their rivals in the second round of pit stops. 15-second penalty for Brad Ratu, contact with car number 847. Now, that's interesting because Brad Ratu was obviously up inside the top 5, so that's quite a significant penalty. As here is the charging Rayhan Leonage on fresh tyres, getting up the inside of one of the Logitech G Altus Esports entries. Zach Hanlon, who is yet to pit, so obviously on old tyres and will not have the pace of some of these faster drivers who are coming through on fresh rubber at the moment.
No surprises either to see Mike Taliancic running long here in the first stint. He's always known for either doing exactly that or for doing something different to everyone else. He's one of the masters with fuel mileage, so no surprise at all to see him doing something different to the majority here. Obviously running the gauntlet like we talked about with the safety car factor, but who knows where this will play out for him across the length of the race. But he's run very wide there. I don't know if he was just giving room or if he... Yeah, that's well off track.
Yeah, I think he might have been a little bit of a mistake because that was... Yeah, as courteous as some of these drivers can be, that was probably a little bit too polite. So I wonder if he just got caught out in the braking zone and just had to fire off forward. So unfortunately, but nevertheless, he's still got plenty of the race in front of him to make that up. Oh, there's some more carnage back here. So that's Craig. He's off. He's a long way off. So I wonder what happened into that braking zone.
Yeah, that's well wide of the mark down there at the hairpin. It looked like tyre smoke. Sometimes it's just a brake lock or if there was a little contact, but that was way wide of the mark down at the hairpin.
And check out the Logitech G replay again, under brakes, pinches that brake. Oh, what he did, that was actually, how heads up driving is that? That is, he knew he was going to fire into the back of that car and he just gave it away, pretty much just aimed for the grass just to get away so he didn't cause contact. So absolute heads up driving by Craig Schultz. That was really good to see.
Yeah, that one could have been a big moment very quickly if he had fired straight into the back of the car in front of him. And it's not easy to make that decision to turn left into the grass right there like that. So that was a really good decision. And we talked about it before, just that slight little mistake on the brakes, and he might have just not calculated for the draft and the overspeed, or maybe the car in front broke just slightly earlier than he was expecting. But it doesn't take much, and you can see how quickly he was closing on the back of that car in front of him and how quickly things can go wrong at the hairpin.
Just watching Kurt Stenberg getting up the inside of Thomas Freeman, but Freeman with the draft closes back in on the run into the hairpin. Incidentally, we have seen Michael Taliancic come in for his pit stop, which means that Zach Hanlon is the only car in the race at the moment yet to take its first compulsory pit stop. He currently sits in second position. Rayhan Lienage is your race leader. Hanlon second, back to Dylan O'Shea, Dylan Rudd. Andrew Dyson up to position 5. He was the earliest out of the top 10 runners to come in for his pit stop. Sebastian Vardell, Chris Ireland, Brad Rattu, who has that 15-second penalty hanging over his head. Robert Gibbs, Rick Kuznetsov rounding out the top 10. Yeah, I'm still curious about why Robert Gibbs spent so long in the pit lane for his first stop, because it's cost him an awful lot of track position, and he is now 14.5 seconds off the race lead.
We did see a similar thing last week at Phillip Island where a couple of cars put themselves into traffic at the first pit stop. James Scott in that race decided to stay out, go long and clear that traffic before he pitted. And I think we're seeing the same thing here again with Gibbs this week. It's compromising him right here. He doesn't have the ability to put the pace down that we know he can do running at the front. So the interesting decision, like you say, and at the moment I don't think it's paying off for him at all.
No, well, the thing is that he'll potentially have a lot shorter stop than his rivals in the second round of pit stops, but if he loses time stuck in traffic, then it'll work to his disadvantage and he won't get that time back. So even with the shorter pit stop. So yeah, I'm not quite sure that this is going to work out for Robert Gibbs at the moment.
And the guys that he's trying to pass here aren't slow either, is the other thing. It's not like he's trying to go through lap traffic or guys running at the back. These guys that he's around here are very quick, so fast enough that it just won't be easy for him to make the moves and get through without losing a lot of time.
I guess it's hard too to keep your emotions in check, because you find yourself that you know you've got decent pace, but when you find yourself just in a little bit of traffic and you just want to clear it as quick as you can because you know what strategy you're playing out. And if you start to think that that's what you've gone for, is that how close to the wall do they get there? But he knows that they've gone for that longer strategy and it's not quite playing out at the moment because he's stuck in traffic. So it's easy to sort of lose your cool a little bit and make a little mistake.
Where it's risky too is, you know, obviously if you try and make a pass, there's always that risk of, you know, contact or having a moment, causing a penalty to yourself, something like that. But the other thing too is he needs to be mindful is the pace that these guys are running right here is relative to the guys at the front. So he's not losing a whole heap of time by staying in line, but as soon as you start racing someone, you instantly give up heaps of time. So if he gets in and starts racing these guys, getting side by side and working his way through, he's going to lose seconds as opposed to, you know, not even tenths right now relative to the guys at the very front.
Good point that you make there, Hobbo, the fact that their lap times are actually still not too bad at the moment, and still only, he's not losing time, Robert Gibbs, to the race leader Rayhan Lienage. However, if he starts battling too hard with Brad Rattu, then he might start losing time. Here he comes up the inside into the hairpin, and Rattu trying to hang tough around the outside, but Robert Gibbs will just gently ease him out to the curb on the exit. Job done.
So we're just hearing some news on Gibbs. The reason it was such a long stop is that he put in 80 litres. He couldn't turn the fuel off, so he basically got stuck with a full tank. So he's pretty much got fuel for the rest of the race now as it plays out. He just needs to get those tyres.
Yeah, that's a hugely costly issue that he's had there. So what we can expect, I guess, from here is that he's going to lose time relative to everyone else across the 2 stops. If he has to take tyres still like everyone else at the next stop, but doesn't need to take fuel, that's going to be, you know, plus whatever the tyre swap change is, anywhere from around 10 to 12, 13 seconds, something like that, that he might end up losing relative to everyone else if he has to take that much more time across his 2 stops now. So yeah, it makes more sense for him to be aggressive here and go for what he can. He needs to try and make up any time that he can if he's got the speed there to do it.
What he has to think about here, though, as well, is the point situation. Obviously, second at Phillip Island last week, so he got a big bundle of points out of the Phillip Island round, 190 points to be specific. Even if he finishes 5th or 6th or 7th or 8th, it's still a very, very healthy points haul that he'll get out of tonight. What he can't afford is to get frustrated, lose his cool, go for a low percentage overtaking manoeuvre, fire off the road and end up down in 35th.
That's exactly right, and he needs to change his approach to the race at this point. If that's how it's going to play out, which it sounds like it will, you know, he needs to not be worrying about winning the race, but just salvaging the best result that he can from here. I mean, if he does have to take an extra 10 seconds worth of pit stops across the race, as it stands right now, the gap, you know, across 10 seconds from the leader will still slot him near the top 5. So plenty of points still on offer if he, you know, plays his cards right. And we know he's got the speed. Obviously, he can run at the front, so he's quick enough to run there and still salvage a very, very good result.
I think the one thing to take away from this series, and we touched a little bit on Phillip Island, not so much here, but at the end of the day, it doesn't matter who wins these races or wins the overall championship over 4 races. It's all about getting into that top 20. So there's no big ticker take parade if you win a race and all the rest of it. It's all about just salvaging and getting as much consistency as you can over these 4 races just to cement yourself in this series. So it's not all about taking that checkered flag. That's hard to tell the race driver, isn't it?
Oh, and of course, there's still the PR value of running up the front as well. I mean, we know how competitive the sim racing scene is here in Australia, and we know that the teams and the drivers, they've all got their commercial partners, and there's no doubt that it's a good story to tell if you're finishing on the top step of the podium or inside the top 3. So these races are still very competitive and very closely fought out, but yes, the drivers do need to have their eye on the bigger prize, which is the entry into the Logitech G Supercar Pro Invitational.
We see that Gibbs has now gotten through some of that traffic. He's got a little clean air, but he's still got a tow from the car in front here. So we'll see what sort of lap times he can put down now that he's got a little bit more room to move.
Yeah, so the last couple of laps he's managed to get ahead of Brad Ratu and also Chris Island, so he's back up into 6th position. Robert Gibbs, incidentally, the last car that had to come down pit lane, Zach Hanlon, has now taken his first pit stop on lap number 21. So that was well and truly the latest stop that we saw for the first round of pit stops. The second round of pit stops should start fairly soon. I reckon any time from about lap 25 onwards, we'll start to see drivers coming in for their second pit stops. Ideally, for that even tyre strategy that we talked about, you want to get to about lap 29 or 30 to give yourself a 14 or 15 lap run for your final stint.
Yeah, some people are forced into certain strategies, but if you're playing it as you want to play it, I think you got to be a little careful here not to pit too early, because you don't want a long run to the finish, and especially if you get that safety car like we talked about before. If you get that side by side teammates at turn 1, yeah, if you get that safety car a little later into the run, you're really compromised on an older tyre. So it's a big risk here to go too early on the final stop, but you can make it from here. So we'll see if anyone's brave and anyone goes and decides to do that.
The 395 Sim Sport entries all running nose to tail there. We saw Rick Kuznetsov getting up the inside of Brad Ratu, and now Sean McNamara wants to get in on the action as well and bump drafting his teammate down towards the hairpin. Does he pull out at the last minute? No, Ratu goes very deep under brakes on the approach to the hairpin. McNamara, in fact, was leaving the door open because Kurt Stenberg was up his inside. Stenberg moving the Trans-Tasman racing entry up into 10th position.
What's fascinating about this little battle with these guys is they all pitted about the same time, so the tyres are about the same, but Sean had a much longer pit stop than the others, I think. So if that's the case, you know, he's not really racing these guys for track position, and being teammates, it's really awkward.
So Sean McNamara, Brad Ratu and Rick Kuznetsov all had pit stops that were about equivalent in terms of time. Kurt Stenberg's pit stop was about 9 seconds shorter than the cars that he's battling at the moment. So he will potentially have a slightly lighter fuel load, but will also probably have to do a longer pit stop for his final stop. Here's our race leader, Rayhan Leonage. He's got an advantage of almost 6 seconds over Dylan O'Shea, who is a couple of seconds ahead of Dylan Rudd. So it's all just started to spread out a bit here at the front of the field as Leonage is still pushing on hard, using all of the road and a little bit more.
Jeez, he's almost lucky to get away with that. Like, you could, how easy for these things to step out, but how close that right rear, it's almost on the grass and the gravel. But man, if he had to touch that and kicked out that sideways on the gravel, he could have looped it really quickly.
I think I talked about before the race started that there's a couple of spots on this track where you've got acceleration zones that aren't straight. On a fresh tyre and quali trim, that's actually flat. You hold it flat out of the right-hander and through the left-hand kink. But as the tyres go away and as the fuel load comes off, you've got to start lifting through there. It's a very awkward traction zone, and you do end up washing right out to that outside curb on the exit. And yeah, you can see there, if you just step slightly too far, disaster.
Oh, how's the
Harrison
battle here?
Degate battling it out with Luke Mitchinson. You would have to say that Luke Mitchinson's race has been anything but satisfactory so far. Started off running inside the top 10, but got absolutely belted from pillar to post and is now out there battling on with a fairly wounded ZB Commodore.
These guys are right around that spot that we haven't talked a whole lot about, but is so important. It's right around the back of the top 20. This is where you want to be all forwards from here. So you get sort of into this part of the field and there's a lot to play for.
One of the drivers that we've talked about a fair bit tonight, Adam Briggs, we saw that he didn't get a lap on the board in qualifying. Then he got a drive-through penalty. He is starting to work his way forward as we see more issues for Brett Loxton a bit further down the order. But Adam Briggs has moved up to position 27, so gradually picking his way up through the field and probably has a bit more pace than the cars that he's around at the moment, but obviously just doesn't have any sort of track position at this stage.
He's doing it the hard way, and he's a long way from the front, but like we talked about, on the back foot from the very get-go. So he's done well to sort of get into the back of the field, and now, you know, all these cars he's racing for genuine positions. So he'll be trying to do anything he can to get, you know, up into that top 20 and bank some good points.
Yeah, I think he's going to make a dive up the inside. Absolutely, he does. I think the good thing for him too is that he looks out that front window and he sees that there are the cars that are still within reach. So I think as a driver, when you find yourself in that position, but if you look forward and you know there's 3, 4, 5 cars possibly in front of you, it does take the pressure off because you know that there's some spots to be made.
Well, he has to go all the way up to Zach Hanlon in 22nd, or he's just made a pass right now, but all the way up to there before you get to someone in front of him that's had a longer pit stop than him as well. So he's set to make gains on the next handful of cars that are in front of him on the track, and they're all not that far up the road. So he is in a decent position here to make up a few more spots just on the pit strategy.
Here is Robert Gibbs, so his march forward continues. He's back up into the top 5 after that disastrously long first pit stop that he had. He's just made the move through on Sebastian Vardell, but it's another 5.5 seconds up the road to the next car, which will be Andrew Dyson, currently sitting in 4th position. And you'd have to say it's been a pretty good recovery from Andrew Dyson so far tonight. Only qualified 13th, but currently runs in position 4, albeit with the second round of pit stops still to come.
Love listening to those onboards when you hear the drivers, how, you know, they're hard on the brakes, they're downshifted, and just seeing what sort of attitude that these cars have got, because obviously we're starting to get towards that next lot of pit stops, and some people will be abusing their tyres a little bit. They're starting to be going away, but I really do love when you start to get to this point and you watch how these cars behave, because it does give you a bit of an insight to how they're travelling and how far away they may be on pit stops. Because if that car's driving horrible and you're struggling with that grip, you'll probably start thinking about possibly getting that pit stop out of the way.
There's Thomas Hinds down the inside of Thomas Freeman. Takes his sim racing pretty seriously, does Thomas Hinds. He'll be a driver who will be very, very keen to make it into the top 20 and earn himself a berth in the Logitech G Supercars Pro Invitational Series. Hayden Veld and Also, yeah, Brian Borg getting into that contest as well. Hins is now clear, so it'll be up to Velds to try and fend off Brian Borg there.
Oh, geez, that looked a lot closer from that camera angle than it really was. I held my breath there, but a good run from Hins. He had, someone's locked a brake, so, it's going to be, they're almost there. A little bit of a kiss, but plenty of room, and that all started from a locked brake, and, man, how close is it through that section?
And Sebastian Flock in the perfect position to take full advantage of that, but got checked up coming out of the last corner by Brian Borg, who had to jump on the anchors because of the moment that Hayden Veld was having in front of him. So that's just caused a bit of a bottleneck there from positions 15 down to about 18. Michael Taliancic not too far away from that battle either.
I was touching on the fact that Hins raced really well at Phillip Island, managed to get himself a decent amount of positions throughout the race and pretty much having a good run today. Yes, he's not right up the pointy end, but if you can start to pick yourself off through the field and get yourself in a decent position, the big picture is looking good for him come in a couple of weeks' time, hopefully.
This was a pretty good battle pack as well. You've got Chris Ireland, Rick Kuznetsov, who we've seen making up quite a few positions in the recent past. Brad Ratu, who, let's not forget, has a 15-second penalty to serve. Kurt Stenberg up inside the top 10 as well. Pretty hot contest for position between all of these cars.
Oh, geez, how aggressive are they in that turn in? They use all the racetrack and a little bit more. They're actually buffing themselves up against that concrete wall, but he's a man that I'm too scared to talk up because I did it last week and absolutely ruined it for him, but really good to see him running inside the top 10.
All went pear-shaped for Kurt Stenberg late in the race at Phillip Island last week, so he's a driver who really needs, as I said, to get a big bundle of points out of tonight. He's currently scored a lowly 32nd in the championship standings with just 64 points.
We touched on, I think he went a little bit, he was a little bit shorter in his stop, but I think it's paying forward at the moment because the pace that he's got, he just seems to be in a position where he's just picking them off one at a time. So he's got a couple of cars in front of him now, so I don't think it'll be too much longer before hopefully he can just reel off a couple more and then start thinking about that pit stop.
Exactly right. So he needs to make hay while the sun shines at the moment. Rick Kuznetsov having a bit of a look up the inside of Chris Ireland. Not quite close enough to get the job done there, but he'll be looking for good traction out of the hairpin. Interesting to see the different lines that drivers do take coming out of the hairpin. It is one of the slowest points on the circuit here at the Hockenheim ring. It's one of what Brenton Hobson would describe as one of the critical traction zones around this circuit. And you do have to really finesse the throttle to make sure you don't get too much wheel spin. That was Sebastian Vardell, I think, brushing the concrete wall.
They love it, don't they? They're using up all the racetrack and a little bit more.
So you wouldn't want to go much closer to it than that. In fact, I think that's a little bit too close for comfort.
You don't want to be a left front guard or a side panel, do you? So looks like, is that Rudd? Rudd's in the pit.
Indeed it is. So he's the first of the front runners to pit, and Brad Ratu is in for a pit stop as well. Now, we heard that Brad Ratu had a 15-second penalty, and I presume that that penalty will be served during this compulsory pit stop.
Yeah, we'll keep an eye out for a long stop and see whether or not he serves it here or decides to take it post-race. But, yeah, we could expect to see him take a long stop here. But Rudd coming in, it's right on that even tyre wear strategy that we talked about before. 15, 16 laps left to go to the end here. So he's the first to jump. Let's see if any others follow.
Brad Ratu, incidentally, did not serve the penalty then, so he will have to take it post-race. Here is Kuznetsov down the inside, this time on Chris Ireland. We saw him thinking about that move on the previous lap, and Kurt Stenberg wants to get in the action as well. Gets into the side of Ireland on the exit of the hairpin. Up the inside, taking full advantage of that. Sean McNamara says, thank you very much. And Chris Ireland has been well and truly hung out to dry there.
Man, how lucky is it, Steady, that Ireland didn't go around, because that definitely would have been a penalty anyway. I think, the stewards may look at it, may want him to readdress. I don't know. We'll leave that up to them. But thankfully, he didn't get turned around because, that's the last thing that Steady needs right now.
Well, there's a case there of Kuznetsov was up the inside, so Ireland had been forced a bit wide of the apex and was probably just turning back into the corner to assume his racing line and perhaps not realising that Stenberg was sticking his nose in there as well. Let's have a look at it from the chopper cam. So moves been done by Kuznetsov. I don't really think you can penalise Kurt Stenberg for that one, to be honest, because he was well up the inside, and I think it was probably more of a case of Ireland just not realising that he was going to be there.
Yeah, I was going to say a little bit of situational awareness, just knowing that you have left that door open, and obviously every driver's going to take that opportunity. And again, how impressive is that car under brakes? We spoke about it at the start of it, but how much ground that he made up under brakes and how it turned in, it really looks nice to drive.
Indeed, so he's got good pace at the moment, Kurt Stenberg. A few more pit stops taking place, so Chris Ireland has come down pit lane for his second pit stop. We've seen Sebastian Vandel in as well. Dylan Rudd took his second stop on the previous lap, so too did Dylan O'Shea and Brad Rattu as well. Highest placed of the cars that's done 2 pit stops at this stage is Dylan Rudd. He's popped out in 13th position outright, about 1.5 seconds ahead of Dylan O'Shea.
How do you go, Hobbo, at this point of the race when you know you've got a pit stop coming? Do you try and stretch this tyre life as much as you can to try and have that fresh tyre advantage at the end? I guess it all depends on where you are on track and who you're battling, but I guess you obviously want to put yourself in the best position possible at the end of these races with the best amount of tyre grip that you can get.
Yeah, that's right. It's very reactive. You sort of depends, like you say, if you've got good pace and you're being held up, then you're smart to come in and get out of that. But if you've got clean air and your pace is pretty good, you'll know by this point in the race what you are around the outside. That's super brave.
That was impressive.
That was a great pass.
Impressive.
But yeah, you know at this point of the race how good your car is, particularly on the run. So if you think you've got pretty decent pace towards the end of your tyre life, then you can probably afford to stay out and give yourself that best chance at the end of the race.
More pit stops happening now. So McNamara is in the pit, so too Kuznetsov, Dyson, Veld and Flock, and they will all feed back in behind Dylan Rudd and Dylan O'Shea. So now we're starting to get a situation where the field will cleanse itself, and we'll soon have a corrected race order. We have got 14 laps remaining in this one.
So far, so good. I think this race has it's been fairly tame. I know that the stewards have been a little bit busy with a little bit of contact, but I guess we expect that in some of these high, hard braking zones, but obviously nothing too intentional. But man, I think it's been a good race, and I think a lot of them who have been praying for that safety car, we haven't seen it, but geez, there's been some good hard racing. And again, I think into this braking zone, everyone making the most of this opportunity in this part of the racetrack.
There's McNamara getting up the inside of Adam Briggs, in fact, who's yet to come in for his second pit stop. Sebastian Vandel involved in that contest as well. This will be a frustrating position for Adam Briggs to be in, a case of what might have been for him tonight.
I think our race leader's in too, by the looks of it. Is that right? So
Indeed. Yep.
Getting that pit stop over and done with, lap 32 or 44. And he did have himself a nice little margin, so it's going to be interesting to see how this all plays out. There's going to be a little bit of ebbs and flows as far as whose stops were a little bit longer earlier on and shorter and all the rest of it. So keen to see, he's happy that he's got that pit stop out of the way. He's now at pit exit, and he didn't lose too much at all.
But he is going to feed back in. Here's the critical thing, not in the lead of the race. So he'll come out behind Dylan Rudd and Dylan O'Shea. So effectively third position for Rayhan Leonage, and he needs to push on hard here. He'll be on cold tyres, but they are fresh tyres, and he needs to work hard to get them up to temperature and work hard to try and get back those 2 positions that he's lost throughout that pit stop cycle. And he's straight on the attack, looking up the inside into the hairpin on Dylan O'Shea, not quite able to make the move.
The one thing I did like about that, even if he didn't think he was actually going to make the move, just move around in the mirror, just so the guys that are in front of you don't know what you're going to do, even if you're not going to make that move, because obviously his brakes, you know, and tyres were obviously a little bit cold from that pit stop. So smart not to make the big dive, but obviously what you want to do is have the drivers in front of you second guessing.
So that leaves Robert Gibbs back in the lead of the race. But obviously with the pit stop still to come for Robert Gibbs, we know that it'll be a short stationary time because he took on so much fuel in that first pit stop, but he does still have to do the tyre change. So the pit stop will be dictated by how long that tyre change takes. I'm not sure that he's quite got the margin to get back out in the lead. I reckon he'll probably feed back out somewhere around Andrew Dyson when you take into consideration both the stationary time to change tyres and obviously the transit time to drive from one end of pit lane to the other.
I guess at the end of the day, that's not too bad of a report card, is it? You know, considering he had that drama with putting too much fuel in the car. So having that, you know, little bit of a disadvantage and to come away with still, you know, at the moment with, by looks of it, could be a top 5. That's still not a bad day, is it, in the office, considering what happened?
How good's this though? So getting into the final 12 laps of this race, we are going to have a flat-out 3-way battle for the win here at Hockenheim. Dylan O'Shea looking to the inside. They're just about 3 wide in the braking zone at the hairpin, and around the outside, Leonage sends it, but he's going to get run out of road on the exit of the hairpin. In fact, really good respect being shown there by Dylan O'Shea. Leonage has to just tuck in back behind the Mustang.
She's talking about a cigarette paper between them. There was absolutely nothing. When he shut the door there, I thought that was going to be contact. So absolutely nothing in it. These guys know that they're caught towards the dying stages of this race, and the win is on the table.
What a finish we're set for. We haven't had any safety cars to compress the field, but it's still shaping up to be an absolute thriller of a contest between these 3 drivers heading into the closing stages. Great to see. And if you think the win doesn't mean anything to them at all, think again, because based on how hard they're racing, it absolutely means something to them.
It's hard to tell a race car driver not to go after a win, isn't it?
This is Sebastian Vardell battling it out with Zach Hanlon. Hanlon once again running a long pit strategy, so running in 10th position, but yet to come down pit lane for his second stop. The race leader, Robert Gibbs, also yet to come into the pits for his second pit stop, and he has lost a bit of time as well. He's now only 12 seconds ahead of the cars behind. It was 13 seconds a couple of laps ago, so Robert Gibbs now starting to lose a bit of time to those cars that have taken on fresher tyres.
Yeah, I think he'd probably be looking at his relatives now and probably taking all that on board, exactly what you just mentioned, Lockie, that he knows that he's given up now a little bit of real estate, so it's probably time to come in, bolt on those Dunlops and just push on to see what he can get, because, look, as close as these 3 are, they don't rule out the fact that these guys could come together, so he could still be on for a decent finish and possibly a win, depending on what sort of plays out. You know, if it gets a little bit too racy there, he wants to be in the best position he can be to capitalise. Again, Kirk Stenberg under brakes, although he's got a bit of a gift there when one of the drivers just moved out of the way, but again, steady, just pushing on.
If you want action in this race, just put the camera on Kurt Stenberg whenever he gets to that hairpin. It seems like that's been his personal overtaking spot as Josh Muggleson gets up the inside of Chris Ireland as well. So Muggleson on a charge, Stenberg on a charge as well. It's all happening in the closing stages of this race. All of the pit strategies are out of the way now, so the drivers know if they want to make up spots, they're going to have to do it on the track.
Yeah, and although those 2 paint jobs are different, they are teammates. You see now Gibbs is in the lane, so he's just now, obviously doesn't have to take any fuel. It'll be just tyres, but now he's just sort of watching that stopwatch now to just see how far he drops down the order. Oh, a big off there for O'Shea. Lucky not to head off into the gravel and make contact with the wall. So he's given up a lot. Remember what I said just before? It's easy to see that the fact that these guys were so close that there could be a coming together.
Interesting to maybe catch a replay of that one and see what triggered that one, whether it was contact with one of the cars that he was battling against or if he made a mistake and did it on his own. But he's rejoined the racetrack only just ahead of his teammate Andrew Dyson, less than a second, in fact, ahead of his simrigs.com DPR teammate. And here we go. Right on cue, the replay for what happened. So we're watching. Oh, we only just caught the end of that. Was there contact with Rayhan Leonage?
Oh, he
It
got the
started
left
early.
rear.
No, he got on the curb at the turning point. He's done it on his own. Just at the point there where you turn right for turn number 1, he had his left wheels out on the ripple strip. That's unsettled the car, and that's what's carted him off the road. And Hobbo, those ripple strips, they can be a bit of a trap, can't they, if you turn in from slightly too wide.
And perfectly demonstrated right there, and he'll be very unhappy with himself for that. Get it right 99 times out of 100, and just that one tiny little error, and it's dropped him off the back of those guys by a little bit there. So you need to knuckle down and see whether or not he can bridge that gap and get back in the fight for a win here.
But the one thing he will take away from it, he'll be thankful that he's still racing, because he carried so much speed into that corner and he was so close to the gravel. If he had to touch the gravel, it could have been contacted with the wall, and then it could have been a lot uglier. So I think as much as he'd be kicking himself, he'd be breathing a sigh of relief at the same time.
He's quite lucky that it's one of the runoff areas in the track that isn't covered in grass, because if it was, you'd be in big trouble. But he lives to fight another day. That's the most important thing. He's also gets to fight with his teammate not far behind him. So he's got good speed. See whether or not he can make his way back up to those guys at the front.
Oh, the king under brakes. Kirk Stenberg, he's going to try around the outside. Of course, not too long ago, we saw a little bit of contact between Stenberg and Ireland, but these guys have recovered now, got their pit stop underway. A little bit of movement in that car. And now Stenny, you look around and you can see behind him too. So these guys all thinking about making a move into this braking zone, and obviously optimising a little bit of the draft. These guys are going to go 3 wide into the braking zone. Who's going to be the bravest? Stenny's been good on brakes all day. Oh, sideways. Is going to make contact again. So Kirk Stenberg now being hustled out of the way. He's dropped a couple of spots. Now they're 3 wide going to this turn. Oh, Stenny shuts the door. Lucky not to get turned round.
Oh, and Thomas Hin's getting pitched right up on the curb as well. Switches back to the inside of Chris Ireland and gets the job done. Hayden Veld just maintaining a watching brief. He would have had a bird's eye view of all of the action from the back of this group of cars. Big winner out of all of that was Thomas Freeman. He gained 3 spots for price of none and has moved up to 11th spot out of that little exchange.
Just watching that replay in the corner, man, that coming together, that car was so sideways and just bounced off Stenny. So he was lucky he was there, because he would have been a lot worse crossed up. But a good little battle. They've all managed to come out on top, and now Stenny's just got his eyes forward to see if he can pick off one more.
He locked his brakes heading into the hairpin there, Chris Ireland, and that was what carted him into the side of Kurt Stenberg. This is the battle for the race lead. Dylan Rudd versus Rayhan Leonage. Leonage, the driver who qualified on pole position earlier on in the race, didn't quite seem to have the race pace in the first stint, but his car's now coming alive as we get into the closing stages. Ranges up on the outside of Dylan Rudd, under brakes into the hairpin. Rudd having to defend. Leonage looking for the better traction and the better exit, but Rudd manages to hold on to the lead for the time being. 7.5 laps remaining in this race. There's a car that's a lap down just in behind these race leaders, and we're seeing that the cars have got slightly different strengths and weaknesses in different parts of the track. I reckon that Leonage is a bit stronger under brakes, but it does seem like Dylan Rudd's getting better drive out of the slow corners.
How much is that is the focus for you, Brenton, as a driver? Like, I guess you sort of go to a racetrack with a setup, and are you aiming already to be, you have sort of a mindset of where you want to be strong, or do you sort of just go onto the track and then sort of work out how the car feels and then take it from there?
Yeah, well, certain tracks you need to be good in certain ways. Like some tracks are going to be really fast and straight, so you need good straight line handling or whatnot. This is a pretty technical track, so you want a car that's fairly well balanced. I think that largely when you talk about things like braking performance and stuff like that, that a lot of that's also to do with driver technique too. So you see some guys are just really good under brakes all the time. Others have different strengths and weaknesses. But you're right. It looks like Rayhan's got the eyes on here. He led this race for a long time, and I think he feels like he's quick enough to win it. So, Dylan's certainly fast, and it's not going to be an easy prospect for either of these guys to beat each other. So this is shaping up to be a really good finish here.
I'll tell you what, there's a battle royale brewing between the simrigs.com DPR teammates as well. Here it is on screen, and this is the contest for the final podium position. Andrew Dyson up the inside of his teammate Dylan O'Shea and gets the job done into the hairpin. So that's Dyson up to 3rd position. Really good progress from Dyson in this race. Started 13th on the grid and is now up inside the top 3. So in qualifying, didn't quite get it together, but he certainly had strong race pace. And guess what? Another action moment down at the hairpin involving Kurt Stenberg. Been saying it all race, but that's been the action zone, and this time it's Thomas Hinz who gets up the inside. Side by side, they'll go through the right-hand kick. Does Hinz get the move complete? Not quite. Stenberg still got the overlap on the inside. Switches back and recaptures the position from Hinz.
I was going to say, Hinz probably isn't aware, but he's going to have his work cut out for him if he's going to try and outbrake Stenberg. Stenberg's been terrific under brakes, but yeah, it looks like that Hinz is just carrying that little bit more pace. And again, I said this from last week, towards the end of the race at Phillip Island, Hinz really started to come on and make his way through the field. So it's happening again here, and he'd be pretty chuffed with that.
Bit more action a bit further back. We're watching Kenneth Latter and also the 205 car of Angus. That's a battle that's for positions 24 and 25. Just goes to show how intense the contests are right the way through this field. Of course, the drivers who are outside the top 20 have got extra incentive to push forward and try and get themselves into the top 20 because of that point situation that we keep talking about. Here's Hinz again on the inside of Stenberg. This time better positioned, and this time I think, yes, he just manages to get the move done on the exit of turn number 3.
Now what's this? Stenberg's going to get this little bit of a toe, but we've said how strong he's going to be under brakes. Look at the pace that he's carrying. He's just going to go to the outside and see if he can outbrake him. He's not going to be afraid. He's really taken as a hit. This is a really great battle in the dying stages of round number 2 for this qualifying series. These guys not given an inch, but Stenny just lost a little bit on exit there.
Really good battle and good clean racing between those drivers. So Hinz moves up another spot. He's another driver who's made very good progress in this race. Started outside the top 20 on the grid, but has moved up to position number 12. Bit of a check on Adam Briggs as well. He has actually made up the most spots of anyone in this race. He is up to 20th position after starting 39th and having a drive-through penalty. So in terms of damage limitation, that's a really good, solid effort from Adam Briggs just to get himself back up inside the top 20.
And lapping faster than the leaders too. So like you said, what could have been had that have not been how the start of the race played out for him?
Yeah, I think the guys up front will be breathing a sigh of relief, wouldn't they? Because, yeah, and for him to bounce back, and we spoke about it before, you just put everything behind you. There's a battle still going on here, but yeah, for him to be in the top 20, that's terrific. That's making the best of a bad situation.
So Rudd and Leonage continuing their battle at the front of the field, separated by just 0.6 of a second. Here they are on screen. Dyson is going to be looking really good in terms of the overall point standings for this qualifying series with positions as they are at the moment, because based on how they sit at the moment, he'll be the only driver who will have finished on the podium in both of the rounds that we've had so far. So we'll need to do the number crunching after this race, but he could even come away as the overall points leader at the end of tonight just based on his consistency. As we say that Thomas Hinz has managed to get ahead of Thomas Freeman, so that's another spot going for Thomas Hinz. He's now up to 11th position, and Kurt Stenberg's going to have a crack at Freeman as well, you would imagine.
It's always a good feeling as a driver when these races start to get into the dying stages and you've still got a decent little hot rod underneath you. You know if you're getting good traction and starting to pull away and making a couple of spots in these last couple of laps, mate, it really does tickle the funny bone, and you just love it that you can walk away from a race and say that they managed to get what they could out of it, and it's always good when the car's feeling good at the end of the race.
These three guys have all done a good job. They've all moved forwards in the race. Up 10 spots for Hinzy now, and up 7 for Freeman, who went on a different strategy. He pitted really early at the first stop, and that's worked out for him now at the end. And then obviously Stanny's up 5 spots as well from where he started. So they've all gone the right direction in the race.
Turning our attention back to this contest for the race lead, the margin's been ebbing and flowing backwards and forwards between Dylan Rudd and Rayhan Leonage. It's down to just 0.3 per second. It seems that Leonage might conserve for a couple of laps and then give his tyres a bit of a rest and then go back on the attack. And now he has started to apply the pressure to Dylan Rudd once again. So the battle far from over. Dylan Rudd cannot afford to make a single mistake or leave the door even a fraction ajar, or Leonage will be straight through.
Yeah, you bring up a valid point there, Lockie, about these cars really don't like it when you overheat the tyres, and Brenton, you'd be the perfect person to talk to about it. It's a kick in the gut sometimes when you use up these tyres and they overheat. You've got to try and get them to cool down again before you can sort of push on.
Yeah, it's so hard to get right. I mean, you need to generate lap speed, but you can't afford to hurt the tyre while you do it. And what really gets them is just the tiny little mistake, as we see. Who was that? That was Dyson that ran wide on the exit of the final corner. And it's those sort of moments that'll just superheat the tyres just briefly, but it takes so much performance out of them. You lose so much grip when that sort of stuff happens, and it takes so long to get them back. You have to be able to generate good lap speed without making those little mistakes. And if you have to try and get the tyres back under you, it's a difficult thing to do. I've been watching this as well because Gibbs has got in the top 5 here, but he's struggling a little bit. I'm looking at his last pit stop, only 4 seconds, which tells me he probably didn't take tyres. So to try and shorten that second stop as much as he could. So it's been a long stint on tyres if that's the case. And this is coming right up to the last couple of laps here, the battle for the top 5.
He's not quite had the pace in this second stint, Robert Gibbs. He's lost touch with the cars ahead, and he's now under some serious pressure from Rick Kuznetsov, another driver who qualified a bit further back and has had to work his way up the order. He's come from 12th on the grid up to 6th position at this stage and would dearly love a top 5 finish.
Isn't it amazing in these races that we can go as long as car out wide there, I think, just moving out of the way for lap traffic. So that was good heads-up driving. But we get to a point here at lap 42 or 44, and there's only 3/10 between the top two. So these guys still giving it. But if you were in this seat, Brenton, do you want to be leading or do you want to be second in these last couple of laps?
I think I probably would like to be leading. I think that Dylan's got really good speed. Like Rahan's all over him, but it seems like to me that he's maybe just not quite quick enough to get this done. It's the long straight here is the real danger zone for Dylan. He just needs to be able to protect down here into the hairpin, but he's held him off this long. It's so close though. I think I would rather be leading, but rather than having to try and initiate a pass here. But I mean, I think that if Rayhan can get a good enough run down here onto the straight, that it's going to be a real dive down here into the hairpin.
You can see that Dylan Rudd's just starting to move the car around a little bit on the straight to try and break the toe. Oh, as he gets a bit of a tap in the rear there from Leonage on the exit of the hairpin. He took quite a late apex there, Dylan Rudd, and Leonage almost saw it as an opportunity to try and slip up the inside.
Yeah, that's. I think that's Braille for. I'm pretty keen to get past. Bang, right there. Just got on the power, but yeah. Look, and what looks could happen too is that these two could be battling, and Dyson behind them could say, all right, if these guys start squirreling around each other, they may just lose a bit of time, and it could bring them back into it. Obviously, we're starting to run out of laps for him to be a strong contender, but you just never know in these dying stages. But he needs to get a good run out of that turn and then follow that draft and try and make the most of that braking zone. But you know straight away that Rudd's going to be driving in his rearview mirror, so it's not going to be easy for him to get past.
Leonage does seem to be particularly strong coming out of turn number 2, leading into that long back straight as the white flag waves to indicate that we are commencing the final lap this time around. So if Rayhan Leonage wants to win this race, you would have to say it's going to be a big Hail Mary move down the inside of the hairpin. Not sure if it's worth the risk. Oh, it might even be earlier than that as he goes in really deep at turn number 2. Now gets a good drive out of the corner and he's going to be right in the toe. So this is not done yet, not by any stretch of the imagination. And Rudd knows it. They'll go side by side down the back straight. And it's going to be a breaking duel between the two ZV Commodores into the hairpin with Rudd on the inside, Leonage on the outside. Can he go all the way round? They'll be side by side on the exit of the hairpin. The problem for Leonage is he'll be on the wrong side of the road for the next right-hander. Can he hang up around there? Side by side, two wheels out over the curb. Now he'll be on the inside, Leonage, for the left-hander. Can he pull it up? They'll still be side by side. The battle's still not resolved. Neither one of these drivers wants to yield. It's going to come right down to the wire, the contest for this race. Leonage now has the inside for the right-hand sweeper. Are they going to sort this out? Still side by side. Unbelievable. Rudd back up the inside for the next left-hander. Leonage, can he hang tough around the outside? Just about, but Rudd muscles him out. Leonage, can he keep the overlap going?
Oh, he's cut the grass.
Oh, switchback manoeuvre coming up for Rudd. Side by side coming into the last corner. Rudd on the inside. It'll be a drag race to the finish line between these two drivers. And it's, wow, Dyson might get second here at the line. He does.
I think he might have
finish.
He might have got a slowdown. We saw that he took a piece of grass, so he may have had to have a bit of a slowdown. And that's got Dyson in second. What an unbelievable finish. Hats off to all those drivers. What an incredible end to that race.
Unbelievable stuff here on the final lap of round 2 of the Logitech G Supercar Pro Invitational Qualifying Series here at Hockenheim. We said that the drivers don't need to win these races. We said that it's all about points and just getting yourself into the top 20. Pretty hard to believe after watching the final lap of that one. That was like they were battling for the championship in the final race of the season.
That was incredible. That last lap of that race, that is something for every driver in any series to go back and watch, because these guys were going hard. They were giving each other plenty of racing room, and the guys didn't touch for the entire lap. Like, that was brilliant. And we spoke about how tricky it is through this S section. These guys just give it a bit. He's got run out of real estate, a little bit of a touch there, and he's had to cut across the grass. So I think that's where he possibly got that slowdown penalty. But man, unbelievable racing between these guys. That was absolute cracker to watch.
Well, if that's any indication of what's to come when we get to the series proper, what a season we are set for. So Dylan Rudd, your race winner. In the end, the margin back to Andrew Dyson, who came from the clouds to get second position. 0.46 of a second. Leonage still managing to score a podium finish, and richly deserved, you would have to say, after that epic demonstration of racing on the final lap. In terms of the championship, just doing a bit of rough mental arithmetic here, Andrew Dyson will walk away as the qualifying series points leader with a third and a second place finish from the first 2 rounds. So 2 different winners, a championship leader who has had a pair of podiums, and yeah, what a fantastic display of intense competition between 2 drivers on the final lap of that race.
I think I'm still processing exactly what happened in that last lap. Like the battle between those guys down to the wire, that was absolutely incredible to watch. And yeah, he'd be heartbroken that he had to get that slowdown penalty, but just unfortunately they just ran out a little bit of racing room. And watch this lap. Like, this is the last half of the lap. They're starting to come into the S's section now. And these, I spoke about it before, the guys back there, Dyson was going to be, well, I didn't think that they were going to have enough time to get through, but this is a part of the race. It gets very narrow through here. A little bit of a touch. He's had to go through the grass. So absolute heartbreak. But at the end of the day, absolutely awesome racing. A lot of respect between the guys, and just unfortunately you can see him here. He's going to be jumping on the brake, just trying to give up that time penalty. So unfortunate ending, but at the end of the day, it's given him a good points day, and it's all about just making sure you finish in that top 20 so you can advance to the season.
Indeed, there is our race winner, Dylan Rudd. He has exited back to the pit lane. Here's confirmation of your results. Rudd from Dyson, Leonage, Dylan O'Shea back to Kuznetsov, who managed to get ahead of Robert Gibbs there in the closing stages to get up to 5th position. Back to McNamara, Ratu, Sebastian Vardell and Josh Muggleson did make it up inside the top 10 in the end. So good result there for Muggo at the end of that one. But let's catch up with some of the drivers that were involved in that incredible battle. And we'll start with our race winner, Dylan Rudd. Dylan, we're all out of breath up here in the commentary box after that last lap, so I can only imagine what it was like for you in the car.
Yeah, it was a very, very intense trying to, keep it on the road and, not make contact with Rehan.
Just give us a sense of what was going through your mind in that final lap. Obviously, you were leading, but Rehan went for a move down the inside on the run into the hairpin. And then, have you ever raced side by side with somebody for that many corners in a row?
No, yeah. So last lap, I was just trying to place the car in a good spot, so I'd try and come out on the exit in the lead, but didn't really happen how I'd like it at the hairpin. Rehan went around the outside of me, but and then it was pretty intense the last half of the lap side by side, definitely.
You were 8th at Phillip Island, first obviously tonight. Who gets it done for you off the track? Who are the sponsors that you would like to thank this evening?
I'd like to thank Sean. Does a lot behind the scenes, and then our sponsors, Racecraft Simulations, Turn In Race Apparel, RSW Graphics, Racing Ears, Custom Ear Protection, Cutting Edge Tracks, and RB Media.
Congratulations, Dylan, on a great result. Valuable points in the bag for this qualifying series. Go and celebrate and go and get ready for another big race next week.
Awesome. Cheers, mate.
And our second place finisher and our new points leader, Andrew Dyson, is going to have a chat to Sandman.
Andrew, what a cracking race finish that was. I think you would have been looking forward. I said with about a lap to go, what you would want is these guys to start battling, but I didn't think in that last lap you'd get close enough, but you did. What were you thinking when you saw what was happening unfolding with you in that last lap?
Well, pretty early on in the last lap, and I saw them kind of going side by side. I thought, okay, here we go, on a half chance here, if they can slow each other up enough. And then as the lap kept going on, they were playing pretty fair and keeping it pretty good. So I thought, yeah, all right, I might get just to the back of them and that'll be the end of it. But coming into that last sector, it looked like Rehan did get a slowdown. So I mentioned it straight away to Dill in the chat. I said, yeah, I think he's got a slowdown there, and I'm sure enough he did. So pretty unlucky for him, because otherwise I wouldn't have got to him. They were playing it out pretty well there.
It was good, hard racing, really respectful. I think that just unfortunately got to the part of the racetrack where it narrowed up and he had to take a tour through the grass. But you'll take those ones at a P2 for you after Phillip Island, mate. That puts you in a strong position at the halfway mark of this very short qualifying series.
Yeah, pretty unexpected, to be honest, particularly with some of the guys that are in here. They're very fast, very competitive. So although there's 20 guys that are probably even faster than here, so keep that in the back of your mind. But yeah, I mean, even starting 10th tonight, or whether it was 13th or something, wasn't expecting to get up this far in the race. So kind of glad it went green the whole way, I guess, because that helped me explore some strategy options and get myself up here, I guess.
Did that strategy change throughout the race? Did you expect a green run? I guess, we spoke with Hobbo throughout the broadcast, and you always as a team take in consideration the possibility of a safety car, but were you planning on, did you think a safety car would happen, or you were quite confident that it might go green?
Nah, I mean, you always got to expect something. Like last week, I probably didn't expect a safety car at Phillip Island, such a big track, heaps of runoff. And we got one anyway from a blown motor, so anything can happen. So I kept it in the back of my mind, and funnily enough, last week I thought it was going to burn me. Luckily, it didn't, but this week I kept that in mind because I didn't want it to happen again or be in that position again. So tried to go a bit longer in the second half of the race, I guess, and just mix up fuel numbers and stuff like that. But obviously, that sort of stuff's not possible without me. Phillip Worley, privateer Ludo, up on the pit wall, making the calls for me. Love his work.
Well, speaking of shout outs, mate, have you got any shout outs for you that's got you to this point and ready for 2023?
Yeah, 100%, man. Thanks to all the guys at DPR, Big Dippers, Southwell List and Hoist, Benmax Mechanical, Phoenix Smokers, Southwell List and Hoist, and MP Designs for the paint job. You guys for putting on the league, Bronson, all the gang for get behind it. And you guys for doing the broadcast as well. And shout out to Lockie for jumping in tonight. Love your work, bro.
Thanks, mate. Congratulations. Well done.
Thanks, man.
Lockie, I'll hand it over to you. You've got our... Oh, man, I don't know if he's unlucky or lucky, but what an incredible finish. But, man, I know he'll be feeling it a little bit as far as that penalty.
Yeah, Rehan Leonage, congratulations, mate. Third place tonight. How are you feeling? Are you happy to be on the podium? Happy to be involved in such a fierce battle on the last lap, or a bit disappointed that you didn't finish a bit higher than third position?
Look, obviously it's a bit unlucky. Dylan was slightly losing his rear end. Probably could have backed out. That might have held my second place, but racing incident. Main point is Bailey got that slowdown done just before the line, so didn't lose anymore. But yeah, it was good fun racing.
It was certainly good fun for us to watch up here in the commentary box, so I'll give you that tip now. The other thing as well that we should point out is that you were 5th at Phillip Island, 3rd tonight, so you've scored really good points out of the first 2 rounds, so that must make you pretty happy and pretty confident heading into the last 2 rounds of this qualifying series.
Yeah, it's a good start to it, but obviously anything can happen, especially with it being Sandown and Bathurst left. Just can't get ahead of myself. Got to do what I kept doing, and looking forward to next week.
That's a good, mature way of looking at it, Rehan. It's obviously all about consistency and, like you say, not getting too far ahead of yourself. Who would you like to thank? Who are your main sponsors that you would like to acknowledge this evening?
To thank PSR and Andrew Gilling for helping me get to the pace, and thanking my dad for being my crew chief. And I thank you guys for putting on this league and the stream.
Some stuff. It's a pleasure to have you as part of the series, Rehan. Well, gentlemen, you would have to say all around that's a very, very deserving top 3 for tonight's qualifying series race at Hockenheim. Of course, as Rehan just alluded to, 2 rounds left in this qualifying series, 2 iconic Aussie circuits in Sandown and Bathurst. Thoughts as we head to Sandown next week, Sandman and Hobbo?
Mate, I'm excited. If it's anything like what we've already seen tonight, the racing was first class. There was so much respect between the drivers. It was really good to watch. And, I guess it turns into a little bit of a pressure cooker for some of them that are maybe outside that top 20, because now they're starting to think, all right, well, we're halfway through this qualifying series. It's Sandown, and then we get to one of the toughest tracks on the calendar, Bathurst. So you don't want to be relying on a good run towards the end of the series to try and, guarantee yourself some points. So no doubt there'll be some people that'll be really happy, like who we've spoken to tonight, as far as their position in the championship, because they know that they're sort of in that top half. But anyone outside the top 20, they'll be starting to sweat.
Hobbo, final thoughts from your perspective tonight?
Yeah, I mean, how fitting is it that we go to a couple of iconic Australian tracks to round out the championship? I mean, that end tonight, I was getting serious Sebring vibes coming into the last couple of laps from last year there. And if we get racing like that here to end out the season, I mean, it hasn't disappointed so far in the first 2 rounds, and with those 2 tracks coming up, I think we can expect more of the same. So great job to all the guys out there tonight. They turned it on. It was great to watch. It was a pleasure to be up here and calling some of the action from my perspective, and I can't wait for the next 2 rounds. If it's anything like tonight, it's going to be awesome.
We're finishing off with some replays of that epic last lap battle that we saw. A big thank you to everybody who has tuned in this evening. This has been round number 2 of the Logitech G Supercar Pro Invitational Qualifying Series. We've had 2 different race winners from our first 2 rounds. Andrew Dyson leads the points heading to Sandown. A big thank you to my co-commentators. I've been joined tonight by Sandman Clark himself, the voice of sim racing, and also Brenton Hobson jumping in for some expert comments as well. Regular service will resume next week at Sandown with Jake Blackhall back in the main commentary position. But on behalf of the entire team here at Race Stars TV, I'm Lockie Mansell. See you next time. Bye for now.